Chapter 14. F***ck. Soren couldn't help but curse. He hurriedly picked up the bag and put it on himself. Luckily, he couldn't fit the items after the trap was removed. Soren made a bag out of the clothes of the dead and put the parts of the crossbow trap inside. After all, this was a real world. Soren didn't have a storage space, nor did he have a multidimensional bag. There weren't many things that he could carry with him. He didn't think that he would be able to escape from the trap. At least he still had the box for the crossbow and the clothes of the dead. As for the loot he obtained at the beginning, it was all gone. Damn it. I can't believe I got a godly thieving card. Soren was no stranger to this card. Someone had drawn it before and opened it in front of everyone. The result was obvious. Soren put on the badly damaged and moldy clothes and opened the second card. After the card was opened, it would turn into an ordinary piece of art. The magic attached to it would disappear. There were people who liked to collect these cards, but no one had ever collected a complete set. At that time, there were 3 sets of cards that were popular among the players. They were all left behind from the Arcane Empire, the Deck of Many Things, the Arcane Cards, and the Deck of Fate. The first set had 108 cards, the second set had 72 cards, and the last set had 36 cards. The easiest to get was the Deck of Many Things. The arcane cards could only be found in rare underground ruins. As for the Deck of Fate, there were only 3 until the fall of the gods. A faint light appeared. After the second Deck of Many Things absorbed Soren's blood, it spun like a whirlpool. The first thing that appeared was a barren land. There were almost no living things in sight. In the distance, there was a boundless desert. In the middle of the desert, a hunched figure appeared. He walked forward with firm steps. His body was as firm as a rock, and his eyes were fixed in the distance. The ascetic. A powerful force poured into Soren's body. After the tearing pain all over his body, endless fatigue surged in his heart. It felt as if he had traveled a long distance of over 10,000 kilometers. His body was already exhausted, and he was only relying on his tenacious willpower to hold on until now. A row of data appeared: Deck of Many Things, the ascetic, activated. Personal ability, perseverance, awakened. Physique increased to 18. Magic modification completed. Soren felt an indescribable fatigue, but at the same time, he felt a strong vitality. It was as if he had really traveled tens of thousands of miles and experienced countless wind, frost, and snow. His body had also become stronger and stronger during the long journey. After the endless fatigue, he had a strength. It was as if as long as he did not fall, he would continue to move forward, and he would not stop until the moment of his death. Perseverance, personal ability. Your will has withstood the test of difficulty, and it has almost formed a kind of spiritual power that is almost tangible. When you face any charm-type control spells, you will gain an additional 5 points of immunity. I've earned it. Soren's face showed a hint of joy. It was as if he was grateful for his good luck. There were very few cards that could increase attributes in the Deck of Many Things. Out of the 108 cards, only a dozen could increase attributes. Other than the 2 mysterious trump cards, the best card that had appeared was the Champion Knight. This card increased the user's strength to 20 points and physique to 18 points. Even though the person who opened the card was a wizard, he still became known as a violent melee wizard. This guy used to have a very high reputation in the Northern Plains. Unfortunately, he fell during the Blizzard War. It was because there were not many attribute points gained from leveling up that many people were looking for other ways to increase their attributes. Regular training was no longer effective for players who had solidified their hero template. Many people had to make a decision when they first allocated 90 attribute points. The reason why Soren was known as a violent dual-wielding rogue was because he gave up on charm and increased all his other attributes to 15 points. In other words, other than his unattractive appearance, his other abilities were at the peak of the average person's level. Items that could increase attributes were very rare. Most of them were legendary items. It was very difficult to obtain them, and they could only be increased by 20 points at most. After entering the realm of extraordinary, it was almost impossible to use items to increase attributes. My physique increased by 3 points. That's equivalent to 6 profession levels. Soren punched his chest. Even though he used 70% of his strength, his internal organs did not feel any discomfort. This meant that his physique was close to the realm of extraordinary. A normal person with 10 points of strength would not be able to hurt him. If his physique could reach 20 points, he would be able to awaken the extraordinary talent, rebirth. It was the easiest extraordinary talent to awaken. The other talents could only be awakened after reaching 25 points of physique. Those who could reach 25 points of physique were already at the realm of legendary professions. As for the personal ability, perseverance, it was a relatively common personal ability. Many people awakened it under difficult circumstances. Soren had awakened it in the fire elemental plane. At that time, he was almost roasted to death. He was lucky enough to survive after falling into the lava. At the same time, he also awakened the talent weak fire resistance. At that time, Soren's body was almost unrecognizable. In the end, he had to spend a lot of money to hire a legendary priest to cast Greater Restoration to save his life. During that time, his strength, physique, and dexterity all decreased by 10 points. He was almost a cripple. There's one more. Soren's eyes were filled with excitement as he looked at the last card, which was the deck of many things, after receiving such a shocking reward. If he could draw another card that increased his attributes, then his current attributes would be much better than when he was a hero. At the very least, his current charm value was now as high as 16 points, and he would no longer be as annoying as he used to be. His charm was so low that even the goblins didn't care about him. Even when he applied to enter the Elven Kingdom, he was rejected. Those damn elves from the Appearance Association. Since he had already used 2 cards, Soren naturally wouldn't leave the last one to rust. With a hint of frustration in his heart, he dripped his blood on the 3rd card. A blood-red light appeared. Soren's face instantly changed. He threw the card away as if it was scalding his hand. It was a summoning card. The card of 10,000 creations was unpredictable. No one could predict what would happen after activating it. There was a possibility of gaining power, or obtaining treasures, but there was also the possibility of summoning monsters, or even receiving damage. The blood-red light represented the abyss and hell. The holy light represented the gods of heaven. The 5-colored light represented the elemental plane. This card summoned creatures from hell and the abyss in the lower planes. A mysterious whirlpool appeared in the middle of the card. The image fell rapidly through the sulfur, lava, and ice, and finally stopped at a ferocious and twisted face. Snake Demon. The card of 10,000 creations turned into a blood-red portal. After seeing the hideous face, Soren's general attributes immediately appeared in his mind. It was the data that the players had collected and evaluated. Snake Demon, Abyss Demon, Grade 3, Challenge Rating, Level 6, Monster Level, 12, Spell-like abilities, highest and lowest attributes, 21, 10, total attribute points, 85-95, special abilities, dual wielding, multi-attack, challenge rating, A+. The snake demon would grow an extra pair of arms as its strength increased. Each additional pair of arms would increase its challenge rating by 5 and its monster level by 6. In other words, the 4-armed snake demon had a challenge rating of 11 and a monster level of 18. The 6-armed snake demon had a challenge rating of 16 and a monster level of 24. As for the 8-armed snake demon, it was already a legendary existence. Under normal circumstances, the appearance of an 8-armed snake demon meant the arrival of a demon lord. There's no way I can fight it head-on. This was the first thought that popped into Soren's mind. His current rogue profession was level 3, while the snake demon's monster level was 12. There was a difference of 9 levels between them. The challenge rating of the team was 6, which meant that a team of at least 5 adventurers with excellent equipment and profession levels above 6 would have a 50% chance of defeating the snake demon in front of him. Although the 2-armed snake demon summoned was the lowest level, it was still not something that he could easily deal with at this moment. Abyss demons were supernatural creatures. Taking into account the difference in profession levels, the snake demon's HP and stamina were more than 3 times higher than his. There was almost no chance of winning if he faced it head-on. Several thoughts flashed through Soren's mind in an instant. However, his movements did not have the slightest hesitation. Just as a dark red teleportation door appeared in front of his eyes and sent the 2-armed snake demon into the stone room, he quickly threw himself to the ground, took out the crossbow box, and pulled the trigger. The teleportation was completed in the next moment. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. A painful scream echoed in the stone room. The snake demon was more than 4 meters tall and weighed more than 600 pounds. As soon as it appeared in the stone room, it was greeted by 6 powerful crossbow bolts. The bolts almost covered its chest, and most of them penetrated its scales and entered its body. The sudden attack caused the snake demon to go berserk. It did not even have time to check its surroundings before it waved its 2 swords wildly. Gotcha! The 20-centimeter thick stone table was split in half. Soren's eyebrows twitched when he saw this. Without hesitation, he threw away the box in his hand and dashed outside. 6 crossbow bolts were not enough to kill the snake demon. It was basically impossible to defeat it. Just by looking at the snake demon's fighting strength, it could probably cut him into pieces with just 1 strike. As soon as Soren fled, the snake demon madly chased after him. Most abyss demons were chaotic and evil creatures. Bloodthirsty, cruel, and murderous were their nature. They basically did not have the time to reason with people. Once the summoning was successful, unless you could enslave it, you would be killed by it. Chapter 15. Difficulty rating, A+. This meant that the Naga demon was the most powerful and the most difficult to deal with among all the monsters, with a challenge rating of 6. With a height of 2.4 meters, the Naga demon was able to create a huge gap in height between its opponents. Its 600 pounds of weight also gave it a much higher strength than normal creatures. Conservatively speaking, its 20 strength was enough to deal overwhelming damage to Soren. In other words, even if he managed to parry the Naga demon's attack, the damage he received would be enough to severely damage his internal organs. The Naga demon's talent for dual wielding made it one of the most dangerous close combat monsters. If its dexterity and wisdom were higher, it would be able to deal with multiple enemies at once without being at a disadvantage. Multi-strike was a very powerful combat ability. It meant that the Naga demon could continuously attack in a short period of time. If it had a high enough strength, it would be impossible to parry its attacks. The Naga demon was a demonic creature from the endless abyss. All demons had one thing in common: they had a layer of demonic skin, which was equivalent to a natural enchanted leather armor. If they were covered in scales, their defense was equivalent to that of a normal chainmail. For Soren, if he slashed the Naga demon 10 times, the damage he would deal would be equivalent to 3 slashes. However, Soren, who was only wearing a piece of cloth, would be sliced open by the Naga demon's attack. It's almost impossible to defeat. With 20 dexterity, Soren had an unprecedented ability to launch attacks. He twisted his body and ran along the wall, dashing into the tunnel outside. The 18 vitality brought by the ascetic card gave him more stamina than before. Although he was still mentally exhausted, it was enough to keep him running for his life. The Naga demon roared and chased after him. Its upper body was that of a humanoid creature. Its arms were unusually thick, and its face was similar to that of a lizard or a snake. There were obvious scales on both sides of its body, and its lower body was a snake tail that was about 5 meters long. This meant that it was a male Naga demon, a powerful warrior among the Naga demons. This was the best news for Soren. The Naga demon was a matriarchal society. Females had a higher status and stronger combat ability. At the same time, they also had a certain amount of spell-like abilities. The Naga demon moved very quickly, especially when it was in its berserk state. It could dive down like a snake. This was also the main reason why the snake demon was rated as A+. It could rely on its huge body to easily break through the line of defense and approach the magic professions in the adventure team. Then, In an instant, it would use its dual-wielding combat ability and multi-attack combat ability to cut the magic professions below profession level 8 into minced meat on the ground. Its snake-like body made it immune to most low-level control spells. Grease had no effect on it, spider web could not bind its 20 points of strength, and the demon's chaotic evil will made it immune to most low-level mind control spells. This was a monster that needed to be slashed to death. We can't escape. Soren was running as fast as he could. Using the complicated tunnels, he easily widened the distance between them. But soon, he realized something important. If he wanted to escape, he had to reopen the secret door outside, which would take at least 3 minutes. 3 minutes was more than enough time for the snake demon to catch up to him. Then, it would cut him into at least 30 pieces of minced meat and pick out the most delicious ones to fill its stomach. I have to fight. When Soren passed by the place where he first found the corpse, he quickly picked up a long sword. Because too much time had passed, the body of the sword was slightly rusty, which meant that it was not sharp enough and could not withstand strong attacks. But now was not the time to think about that. It was almost impossible to defeat the snake demon in a direct battle. If he wanted to defeat it, Soren could only bet on his luck. Without hesitation, Soren ran towards another tunnel that he had not explored before. He had to take a gamble. Demons had more stamina than mortals. Their high HP meant that even if they were in a heavily injured state, they would still be a threat. The only way Soren could think of was to use the traps here to kill it. Of course, there was also the possibility that he would be the one killed by the traps. 20 points of agility. This was the domain of extraordinary humans. It meant that Soren's footsteps were lighter than a halfling's. It also meant that his reflexes were sharper than an elf's. It also meant that his body was more resilient than most normal life forms. He had to take a gamble. He had to gamble that there were powerful and deadly traps in this unexplored tunnel, and that they would not be triggered when he passed through it. Soren was a human. The area of his feet was very small, and 20 points of agility meant that he had a high chance of avoiding the traps. However, the snake demon was a snake-type demon. Its lower body was in contact with the ground, and its weight was more than 600 pounds. This meant that it would trigger most of the traps when it moved. Any traps that were set according to human standards and triggered by their weight would hit its body. Due to its size, there was no way for it to dodge. A wide tunnel appeared in front of his eyes. Soren did not even have time to observe whether there were traces of man-made traps nearby. Instead, he directly leaped, and then relied on his strong physical toughness and sense of balance to run 3 steps on the wall in a horizontal manner. Then, he turned around and grabbed an inverted stalactite, forcing his body to move forward 5 meters against the wall. This was the most likely place to set up a trap based on his experience. Traps needed enough space to be set up, and the more hidden the trap, the more necessary it was. He did not stop at all. Soren began to slow down, but he still moved forward cautiously. The snake demon's figure appeared behind him. This demon from the abyss was completely enraged by the crossbow bolts. When it saw Soren, it did not hesitate to charge at him. Its huge body did not affect its movement speed at all. Most snake-type lifeforms had twice the speed of a normal human being when running at full speed. However, when it was about to reach Soren, the ground suddenly shook. Its long and narrow tail triggered the traps buried in the ground, and then a wave of crossbow bolts flew out from both sides. Roar! A painful howl sounded. 6 bolts were stuck in the snake demon's ribs, and blood kept dripping. Its blood-red eyes were filled with killing intent and anger. When it saw Soren close by, it roared angrily. 12 crossbows. They could deal more than 120 points of damage to a human. It was enough to instantly kill most warriors below level 10, but it was not enough to seriously injure the snake demon. This meant that the snake demon's body was almost as tough as a lesser dragon, and its HP was probably more than 150 points, which was 5 or 6 times more than Soren's HP. There should be another trap. Soren's pupils shrank. He did not hesitate to increase his pace, even if it meant that he might trigger a trap. The layout of the tunnel felt familiar to him. This was because the place where he first found the corpse had a similar layout. This meant that there was a certain possibility that there was another acid trap ahead. This was fatal for Soren. Similarly, it was enough to threaten the snake demon's life. A winding passageway appeared. Soren's expression changed. He took a deep breath and began to run. The layout in front of him was similar to the place where he found the corpse of the thief. Acid traps were mostly buried near the walls, which meant that he could not use his dexterity to run through them. He could only try to jump through them. This was a distance of more than 10 meters. He did not have any spell-like abilities, and only his dexterity had reached the transcendent level. This was a challenge for Soren. I can do it. This won't be a problem for me. Soren took another deep breath. In his previous life, the human record for jumping was 10.6 meters. With his current physical fitness, he was not too far off from the best athletes. Even if he did not have enough strength, his dexterity allowed him to perfectly unleash his explosive power. It was not impossible for him to jump the distance in front of him. Bang! Soren's figure leapt out. He crossed the distance of more than 10 meters in an instant. He almost jumped out of this area in a rather embarrassing manner. Soren did not dare to hesitate. He was not sure if there was an acid trap here, so he took a deep breath and continued to run forward. Whoosh! Soren's figure suddenly froze. Just as he turned a corner, an iron spear suddenly came out from the ground. It pierced through his leg and instantly pierced through his thigh. If he did not move his body at the last moment, the spear would have pierced through his lower body and into his large intestine. Fresh blood spurted out. Soren clenched his teeth and crumpled his clothes into a ball. He then grabbed his thigh with both hands and slowly pulled it out of the spear. Large amounts of blood splattered out. The spear scraped off a piece of flesh, making the wound even worse. Soren's whole body was trembling. After the trembling, his body stiffened. In less than a second or two, his whole body was soaked in sweat. Phew! When he pulled his thigh out of the iron spear, he felt like he was about to collapse. He hastily used a rag to bandage his wound, then tightened his muscles and tied a dead knot. He then staggered to the edge of the stone wall. There was no way he could escape. If he continued to run with this kind of wound, he would die from blood loss even without the snake demon's help. With the loss of blood, his stamina was also rapidly decreasing. The only way he could survive was if there really was a strong acid trap in front of him. If it was just a crossbow trap, it would not be enough to kill the snake demon. Time was too long. When the snake demon appeared, Soren felt like he was facing his final fate. Fortunately, fate was on his side. Soren's judgment was not wrong. There really was a trap at the entrance of the passage, but it was not a strong acid trap. When the snake demon passed through, there was a violent explosion. Explosive trap. There were explosives in the passage, or maybe there was a trigger for fireball. Plop. There was a slight noise. Soren's face, which had just revealed a smile of relief, suddenly froze. He was almost flustered and exasperated. I can't believe you're still alive. He clenched his long sword tightly, and his expression gradually became more ruthless. He was going to give it his all. Chapter 16. Shadow Hide. Soren's figure gradually became hazy in the darkness. He clenched his teeth and tore a piece of cloth from his tattered clothes. He then wrapped it around the wound on his leg to strangle it. This would temporarily suppress the injury on his body and slightly reduce the pain when he moved. However, this had to be done in a short period of time. Otherwise, it would worsen the injury. Allocate all the EXP to Rogue. Soren calmly pulled out his sword and began to allocate the EXP. The Slaughter EXP was a type of soul energy, and was also the highest level of EXP. It could be used to level up any profession, including subclasses, class advancement, and so on. At the same time, it could also be used to perform sacrificial ceremonies, summoning ceremonies, and alchemy exchanges. Under normal circumstances, no one would casually use the Slaughter EXP, because there were simply too many things that could be used in the future. However, for the current Soren, if he didn't use all his trump cards, he might not have a future. A row of text appeared in front of his eyes. Rogue has leveled up to level 4. Received 24, DX 20 plus, INT 18 to 10, asterisk 0. 5. Skill points, HP increased by 10, profession HP 6 plus, con 18 to 10, asterisk 0. 5. Received 1 free attribute point. Soren's pale face regained some color. The 10 HP he received from leveling up his rogue class reduced his injury from heavily injured to moderately injured. This meant that his reflexes weren't weakened, and his stamina consumption rate was also reduced by half. For the time being, his injury wouldn't worsen. He allocated all his skill points to stealth, raising it to 102 points in one go. His figure gradually faded in the darkness. After reaching 100 points in sneak, Soren's shadow hide had produced a spell-like effect similar to the blur when he activated it. Unless someone was paying close attention to him, they wouldn't be able to detect his presence. As for the precious free attribute point, Soren gritted his teeth and allocated it to vitality. There wasn't much of a difference between 20 and 21 points in dexterity, unless he increased it to 25 points in one go and awakened the legendary ability, Shadow Domain. Otherwise, only by assigning this free attribute to his vitality could he ensure his greatest survivability. An attribute that was close to Transcendent Constitution meant that his wounds would not be infected and would not continue to worsen. As long as he increased his constitution a little more, he would have the special ability of regeneration. This was a must-have ability for high-level adventurers. Soren felt that he had recovered quite a bit of his stamina with the bonus point of vitality. He carefully moved his feet and began to move towards the bend. There could also be traps nearby. Before he obtained the Trap Sense ability, he could no longer continue to take risks. He had to kill that snake demon. Only then would he have time to slowly recover from his injuries. Otherwise, with the recovery ability of abyssal demons, it was very likely that his situation would become more and more dangerous. There is no smell of gunpowder in the air. Soren moved forward bit by bit, using his past experience to analyze the situation. He gradually approached the tunnel after the explosion. It's probably an explosion trap. It's using a magical device. It might be a fireball spell formation. Without the skill, spell identification, Soren could not sense the elemental energy in the air. However, his experience was still very useful. He saw the snake demon not far away. Its huge body was in a terrible state, and the ground was covered in blood and scales. The snake demon's body was more than 600 pounds, and there was no way for it to dodge in the tunnel. The explosion trap almost directly exploded next to its body. If the snake demon did not have the strong resistance of a demon, it would have been blown to pieces on the spot. However, it was not in a good condition either. White bones could be seen around its waist, and a section of its intestines had fallen to the ground. Its spine was almost completely shattered. If it was not for the special ability of a transcendent, it would not have been able to survive until now. Hiss. The snake demon hissed. It instantly noticed Soren and looked at him with hatred. Low-level snake demons did not have much ability to speak. Their species determined that only the females had higher intelligence. The four-armed snake demons and below could only speak the low-level demon language. Only spellcasters with sacrificial abilities could understand the common human language and other languages. It wanted to kill the murderer who summoned it to attack it and caused it to become like this. The murderous nature of the abyss demon made it ignore the injuries on its body. It actually forcibly twisted its long and narrow snake tail, wanting to get closer to Soren again. Clang! The snake demon's physical strength was severely reduced due to its severe injuries. It kept growling in pain as it moved its body. Soren easily dodged the sword that was coming at him. He then stabbed the snake demon's chest, where many of its scales had already been blown off. Splat! A stream of hot blood spurted out. Most snake demons were cold-blooded creatures, but there were many snake demons that lived in lava areas. Hiss! Some of the blood splashed onto Soren's body, and he soon felt a burning sensation. His expression changed slightly, and he quickly distanced himself from the snake demon. Acidic blood? The parts that were splashed by the blood already had slight scars, as if they had been stained with diluted sulfuric acid. This was the characteristic of the blood of demons and dragons. The snake demon in front of him should be the descendant of a high-ranked demon. The sword pierced the snake demon's chest, worsening its injuries. It attacked crazily, but it still could not hit the enemy in front of it. The exhaustion of its physical strength had reduced its strength, and the injuries on its body had seriously affected its agility. In its near-death state, it could only fight at less than 30% of its original strength. It's over. Soren once again dodged the snake demon's slash. He then took a deep breath and roared. He jumped up, holding the sword with both hands, and stabbed the snake demon's heart. Die! Soren's eyes were bloodshot. The skull of a demon was abnormally strong. Unless it was holding a rare-grade weapon, the head was not the most fatal weakness. The snake demon's huge body stiffened for a moment. When Soren pulled out the sword, the snake demon's 600-pound body fell to the ground. Blood gushed out and seeped into the nearby ground. Phew! Soren sat on the ground in a sorry state. The consequence of fighting forcefully was that the injury on his leg had worsened. Berserk consumed a lot of stamina. Before one's constitution reached 20 points, almost no creature could maintain a high-intensity battle for more than half an hour. Even giants, demons, and dragons could not do it. Clap, clap, clap. It's not a high-intensity battle. Stupa. Only when one's constitution reached 20 points and entered the rare-grade realm could the consumption and recovery of stamina last for a long time. Soren used his sword to cut open the strangling cloth, and then cut off the flesh that could not be healed. This was a very painful process, but it ensured his recovery speed. A row of data appeared, jump/successfully hit. Additional 2, 12 to 10, strength damage bonus. Dealt 13 piercing damage to target. Target killed. Successfully killed snake demon. Extracted soul energy from target. Received 1800 slaughter EXP, an indescribable heat flowed into Soren's body. This was the soul energy of the target he killed. There was a rumor that the player's hero class template was fixed with the Son of Slaughter ability. They inherited a trace of the God of Slaughter's divine power, which was why they were able to level up much faster than the NPCs in the storyline. There was no way to confirm this theory, but Soren remembered that after mastering the slaughter, soul, and death-related abilities, the slaughter EXP gained from killing an enemy would be increased by 10% to 20%. A short rest. After recovering some of his stamina, Soren began to collect his loot. Demons from the abyss rarely carried money with them, but they could obtain some rare equipment, such as the snake demon's weapon. Soren picked up the 2 longswords immediately. Item identification. Soren looked at the long sword in his hand. It was about 1.5 meters long, and the blade was 10 centimeters wide. There were snake-like patterns on the hilt, and there was a strange rune on it. The body of the sword was faintly red, and when he touched it with his fingers, there seemed to be a trace of burning breath. The blade was very sharp, and its steel was better than normal military weapons. However, it was also much heavier than other weapons. It felt heavy in his hand. A row of data appeared, item type, Snake Demon Longsword +1 item grade, rare, grade 1, item description, a longsword forged with abyssal fire rock. It has a strong slashing and piercing effect, and an additional 1 point of fire damage. Equipment requirement, 14 strength or above. Special effect, small to medium-sized creatures are considered as greatsword type. Strength requirement +2. Not enough strength. This was Soren's first thought when he picked up the longsword. Since the longsword was made for snake demons, its size and weight were far beyond what a normal person could use. Soren could pick up the longsword, but when he swung it around, he felt that its weight was a little too heavy, and it affected his combat effectiveness. It was like a normal person could lift an object weighing 50 kilograms, but they couldn't use a weapon that weighed 50 kilograms in battle. By the time they managed to lift it up, they would have been slashed countless times. If one's strength didn't meet the weapon's requirements, it would consume a lot of stamina in battle, and the speed and lethality of the weapon would decrease significantly. The dagger left afterimages in Soren's hand. However, when he swung the long sword, Soren's slashing speed was less than half of his usual speed. Damn it. There's a strength penalty. Soren swung the long sword a dozen times, and his arms felt sore and numb. His stamina was also greatly depleted. Clash of the Titans was very demanding in certain aspects. A normal person could walk for 20 kilometers, jog for 10 kilometers, and sprint for less than 1 or 2 kilometers. These things were perfectly simulated in Clash of the Titans, and for a period of time, many players cursed. Therefore, when Soren felt the numbness in his arms, he immediately knew that there would be a strength penalty when he wielded the long sword. Although there was no data to show it. Soren could calculate the strength penalty in his mind: accuracy -4, damage -4, attack speed -4, stamina consumption plus 200%. Originally, he could last for 10 minutes, but now, he estimated that he wouldn't even last 2 minutes. He smiled bitterly. Soren put down the snake demon longsword with a bitter smile. After all, it was a weapon used by an enemy that weighed more than 600 pounds. It was almost as heavy as a greatsword used by humans. His current physique and stamina were good enough, but if he didn't have enough strength, he might as well use a normal dagger. A normal longsword weighed around 2 to 3 kilograms, but this longsword was at least 15 kilograms. 2 swords would weigh 30 kilograms. If he added some refined iron, it would weigh as much as a young woman. Without the template of a previous hero class, Soren couldn't allocate more than 18 points of strength. His current 12 points of strength was only enough for him to wield normal weapons. After all, under the strength penalty, he couldn't even use half of his strength. Looks like I'll have to think of a way to sell them. Soren carried the snake demon longswords on his back. The weight of 30 kilograms made him feel heavy, and he felt that his 12 points of strength wasn't enough. However, he had to bring the long swords out. The market price of a grade 1 rare grade weapon was more than 100 Kindler coins. The snake demon longsword was a great sword, and its value would increase by 20 to 50%. In other words, these 2 grade 1 rare grade longswords were worth about 300 Kindler coins. If he sold them, he would be able to live comfortably. Chapter 17. The snake demon's corpse was actually quite valuable. For example, its skin could be peeled off to make a grade 1 enchanted leather armor. Its heart was the favorite of many spellcasters, and its blood could even be used as an alchemy material. However, there was a more troublesome thing. It was difficult to sell demon-type items, at least in the southern cities. In comparison, weapons were easier to sell. Moreover, Soren couldn't take so many items with him. Once the information about the snake demon was leaked, it would most likely lead to an investigation by the church. Summoning a demon to the material plane would result in a trial. Raise rogue level. Soren treated his wounds and immediately raised his rogue level again. He didn't have any healing potions on him, so he could only rely on his profession level to recover. At the very least, he could rely on the increase of his HP to reduce his injuries to a light injury status. A row of data appeared: Rogue Profession raised to level 5. Received 24, DX 20+, INT 18 to 10, *0. 5. Skill points: HP increased by 11, Profession HP 6+, Con 19 to 10, *0. 5. Learned Combat Skill, Shadow Strike. Rogue Profession level raised to grade 2. Received the potential for a bloodline purification ritual. Received an additional profession ability. Soren glanced at it and didn't pay attention to anything else. The increase from grade 1 to grade 2 was more obvious. The former belonged to the small gangs in the city, while the latter had the qualifications to leave the city for adventures. Grade 2 professions could receive an additional profession ability point, but it was limited to the profession ability. For example, Soren was a rogue, so he could receive an additional rogue profession ability. He couldn't receive any other profession ability or individual ability. All the skill points were allocated to traps. This treasure cave hadn't been fully explored yet, so Soren wanted to strengthen his trap detection ability. A grade 2 rogue had 3 profession abilities to choose from. They were blind battle, proficiency. After hiding in the shadows for a long time, the bandit has gradually gotten used to fighting in the dark. His fighting style is no longer limited to sight. Hearing, intuition, smell, and so on have become his judgment factors in battle. Even in complete darkness, the bandit can still have a good fighting strength. Evasion +1, accuracy +1. Military weapons, proficiency. After a long period of training, the professional is able to use all military weapons, including but not limited to long swords, great swords, machetes, crossbows, two-handed greatswords, spears, flails, and so on. When using military weapons in battle, a professionist would be able to use them with ease, knowing how to use them to deal more damage and how to hit the enemy more easily. Hit +1, damage +1, dodging, proficiency. Rogues have learned how to use their dexterity in long-term battles. They can do many moves that ordinary people can't do to avoid attacks. Evade +1, reflex +1. Without a doubt, he chose the military weapon, mastery, which was the first talent he had obtained. This was a very important class specialty. Most melee professions had to master it, because it meant that they could use most weapons skillfully to deal with unexpected situations during adventures. Moreover, it was the prerequisite for learning many basic combat skills. For example, the combat skill, sword form, heavy hack, after mastering the basic swordsmanship required the prerequisite of mastery of military weapons. This was the specialty of a warrior. Basically, it could be obtained after the advancement. Soren didn't have the time to train for a long time, so he could only obtain it through talent points. If it was normal training, it would take 1 or 2 years to obtain this specialty to fully familiarize himself with all military weapons. This time was enough for him to do many things. As for the last bloodline purification potential, it was something that only the rich could afford. In short, it was to purify one's bloodline potential. According to the current constitution, one would gain a new HP calculation and cleanse the impurities in one's body. For example, Soren's current HP was 52 points. If he held a bloodline purification ceremony, then his HP would be, profession HP 6+, 19 to 10, *5, *5 plus 19 constitution plus 10 base HP equals 84 HP. It was equivalent to 3 more profession levels of HP. It was a very strong bloodline enhancement. But it was also very expensive. The advancement ceremony would cost more than 1,000 Kindler coins. This ceremony could be held once for each advancement. The biggest increase should be after the advancement into a legendary profession. This was because after the bloodline purification ceremony, one would obtain the special talent of legendary life. This was the key to many melee professions being able to face an adult giant dragon head-on. The bloodline purification ceremony. Soren didn't think about it for the time being because this ceremony was the same whenever it was held. It just increased one's HP according to their constitution and profession level. This kind of ceremony required a lot of rare materials. At the same time, it also required the basic skills of spell identification and knowledge. It was very difficult to meet its requirements in the early stages. After all, there was once a warlock teammate who wanted to advance into a dragon disciple, but Soren's entire team emptied their personal savings. 1,000 Kindler coins was a conservative expenditure. This money was enough for Soren to equip himself and double his combat strength. At this moment, after Soren became a grade 2 rogue, his stats changed. Name, Soren. Race, half-elf. Attributes, Strength 12, Dexterity 20, +1, Constitution 19, Intelligence 18, +1, Wisdom 15, Charm 16 alignment, lawful evil profession, level 10 commoner, max, / level 5 rogue, 03000, grade 2, HP, 5, 252 EXP, 950, slaughter EXP, 0, profession EXP, unassigned. Skill points, none attribute points, none status, normal profession skills, sneak 102, steal 35, pick lock 45, snare 54 legendary skills, omnipotent hands, sealed, weakened, personal abilities, nimble left hand, eidetic. Memory, perseverance profession abilities, grasp of shadows, military weapon, proficiency, combat skills, shadow strike. After advancing into grade 2, the amount of EXP needed to increase one's strength had increased tremendously. However, at the same time, he had also mastered a powerful combat skill, which was the Shadow Strike ability that Soren had been looking forward to. Shadow Strike, combat skill. Advanced rogues have gradually touched upon the power of the shadow domain. When attacking an enemy, they can rely on their mastery of the shadow domain to launch a spell-like attack. Shadow Strike can be activated at the same time as Backstab, dealing an additional 5 shadow damage that ignores physical defense. This ability can increase damage by 1 for every rogue level, increasing the number of times it can be used. Requires the rogue's prerequisite ability, Grasp of Shadows. This was a very powerful ability. With Soren's current level as a rogue, he could use Shadow Strike 5 times a day. As long as the enemy did not have shadow resistance, it would deal 5 shadow damage that ignores physical defense. This was a fatal threat to the relatively weak HP of low-level professions in the early stages. Grade 2 was a watershed. Wizards began to master level 3 arcane spells, and finally broke away from their low combat strength. Warriors began to master aura / in preparation for advancing into knights, sword saints, and weapon masters. Monks had more or less mastered chi, and whether they wanted to advance into ascetics or fist masters in the future, they needed to lay a good foundation. Basically, all professions would have a huge improvement after reaching grade 2. Rogues also began to specialize from this point, whether it was the godly thief, the lurker, or the assassin, who was proficient in assassination techniques. All of them had to decide their future now. However, Soren had no plans to advance into a profession at the moment. Not to mention the harsh conditions required to advance into a profession, just the 5,000 slaughter EXP required to advance into a profession was enough to make him flinch. The NPCs in the storyline needed a long time to train to advance into a profession. Although Soren had skipped this step, he needed to use slaughter EXP, soul energy, to make up for it. Advancing into a profession was not necessarily a good thing. The godly thief's combat strength was low, the lurker's explosive power was not enough, and the assassin's killing power was high, but their overall abilities were not good. In terms of survivability, rogues were still the strongest. At the very least, before he had more than 10 personal abilities, any other profession would not be as useful as a basic profession. Of course. If you had dozens of personal abilities, including but not limited to personal abilities, profession abilities, innate abilities, and so on, you would be very powerful no matter what profession you advanced into. For example, unarmed combat, grandmaster, 1-inch punch, legendary, blind battle, legendary, super sixth sense, instinctive evasion, legendary, conditioned reflex, legendary, and so on. As long as you wanted to, you could even take down an army by yourself while running naked with your eyes closed. After all, profession level was only a part of one's strength. In a life and death battle, it depended on your overall strength. It was not just profession level, but also the strength of your attributes, the ability of your abilities, and the lowest wooden board in the bucket. The lowest wooden board in the bucket determined how much water it could hold. That was the key to whether you could reach the realm of legends. Chapter 18. Time passed bit by bit. Soren's stamina was slowly recovering. The wound on his thigh was starting to feel numb and itchy. This meant that his 19 points of vitality was starting to take effect. The wound was slowly healing, but it still wasn't as effective as rebirth. If he were to rest, the wound would be completely healed in a day or two. However, Soren couldn't afford to wait that long. He didn't care about the wound tearing open again and continued to explore the cave. The snake demon's sword was placed at the entrance. The weight of the two swords was so heavy that Soren felt like he was wearing a full body armor. It greatly affected his speed. He also took back the card of manifestation. It was a special item, and it might be useful if he kept it with him. He pulled out the bolts from the snake demon's body one by one and reloaded them. If there was a battle later, the crossbow would save him a lot of trouble. There were 2 forked passages in the cave. He had only explored one of them, and there should be another passage that led to a secret room. The traps in the passage were almost all triggered. However, Soren didn't dare to be careless. He explored the passage inch by inch, and found another trap behind a stone wall. It was a spike trap. If triggered, a row of sharp blades would come out from the ground, smeared with poison. A gust of cold wind blew past. This side of the passage should be connected to the surface. There was still a faint light coming from it. The air was filled with the smell of antiseptic. It smelled a little like formalin, but it was much stronger. There was also a faint smell of blood. Soren's expression became serious. He put his hand on the hilt of his sword and walked along the passage. Some corpses appeared in his sight, and their bodies were wrapped in bandages. Mummies? The scene in front of him triggered his memory. It was a record of hundreds of adventures. Mummy, Undead, Grade 2, Challenge Rating, Level 3, Monster Level 6, Spell-like abilities, highest and lowest attributes, 18 and 5, total attribute points, 65-75, specialty, Undead Constitution, negative energy corrosion, difficulty, D+. There was a slight noise. As expected, when Soren got closer, 2 or 3 of the corpses started moving. Their movements were very stiff and slow. Their movement speed was even slower than that of a child's. These were ordinary mummies without any superpowers. They only had the basic talents of undead creatures. Mummies had very low agility, but their strength was above that of an adult. Because of the extraordinary characteristics of the undead, their constitution was conservatively estimated to be above 15 points. Therefore, they were the meat shields of the low-level undead, second only to zombies. Swish! A row of crossbow bolts flew out. The mummy at the front was hit in an instant. 6 crossbow bolts penetrated its body, and it swayed for a moment before falling to the ground. Undead creatures had undead energy in their bodies. By dispersing this energy, they could be killed. However, one thing to note was that many undead creatures had negative energy corrosive effects. If one was scratched by them, it was very likely that they would be infected with diseases or suffer additional corrosive damage from undead energy. If only there was a priest. A thought flashed through Soren's mind, and he immediately drew his sword and charged forward. The mummy's movements were slow, so it was the easiest enemy for him to deal with. Clang! 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 Soren's figure moved around the remaining 2 mummies. Even if his legs were slightly injured, these mummies could not attack him at all. The agility of the low-level mummies was basically below 10 points. As long as he moved around them, he could slowly dismantle them. Of course, if you encountered an ancient mummy, it would be a tragedy. The ancient mummy's challenge rating was 12, and its level was 18. Its agility was conservatively estimated to be above 21 points. In many ancient ruins, the ancient mummy was an adventurer's nightmare. After a short battle, Soren quickly dismantled the mummy in front of him using his agility, and received 300 slaughter EXP. He originally wanted to retrieve the crossbow bolts, but after seeing the rotten flesh on the mummy's body, he gave up on the idea. This was not only because it was disgusting, but more importantly, undead creatures were really disgusting. Behind the mummy was a door. After Soren pushed it open, he immediately saw many corpses, and some human-like organs soaked in an unknown liquid. The smell of blood became stronger. On the workbench, there was a jar of dark red liquid, and a fist-sized eyeball was soaked in it. An unknown eye stalk. Soren could not tell what it was, so he did not plan to take it with him. The secret room was filled with undead energy. Because the Lich had once cast a spell here, negative energy would gather here to a certain extent, and it was not a good thing for any living creature. If one stayed here for too long, they would be exposed to undead energy radiation. The negative energy field here could only be dispelled after a priest purified it. After checking for traps, Soren began to rummage through the cabinets in search of valuable items. He found a few books, some records of strange symbols, more than 10 gold dirhams, and a strange bracer. The books were all information. Soren glanced at them and put them away. He had an eidetic memory, and if he brought them back, they should be able to increase his knowledge skill points. Because Soren did not receive any education, he did not awaken any knowledge skill points. At the very least, he needed to be able to understand most of the common languages in order to obtain the corresponding knowledge skill. This was a good thing for someone with the scholar class, as they were born with 25 knowledge skill points. The strange symbols were the experiment records. They were probably recorded in a special secret language. Soren's knowledge skill points were not enough, and he did not know how to identify spells, so he could not read these records. And it seemed like they were all research on the creation of undead creatures. These things were not useful to him, and he would not be able to get rid of them, so he just left them where they were. Finally, there was the strange bracer. He was familiar with this item, and after trying to identify it, its information was displayed. Item type, Ogre Bracer of Strength. Item grade, Rare, Grade 1, Item description, a special item made from the skin of an ogre. After wearing it, it can increase the user's strength to the level of an ogre. Equipment requirements, none. Equipment effect, Strength +2, strength can be increased to a maximum of 18 points. It's actually this item? Soren's face showed a hint of surprise, and he immediately wore it on his wrist. The Ogre Bracer of Strength was the most popular item in the early stages of the game. There were a total of 3 pieces in this set, the Ogre Bracer of Strength, the Ogre Gloves of Strength, and the Ogre Belt of Strength. Each piece of equipment could increase strength by 2 points, but the maximum was 18 points. In other words, it was useless if the user's strength exceeded 18 points. In the past, this item was completely useless to him. Because the players inherited the hero class template, their initial stats were as high as 90 points, and most melee players had 18 points of strength. This kind of equipment was meant for mages and magikind class players. But for the current Soren, this Ogre Bracer of Strength was very useful, because after wearing it, he could just barely use the Snake Demon Longsword. Even if there was still a penalty of 2 points of strength. If it was a necromancer, there should be a lot of valuable things here. However, Soren had no interest in those body parts. He packed the books and gold coins and took them away, leaving the other things in their original place. After calculating the time, he had already spent half a day here, and it should be dark outside. Soren's rations were all gone because of the Thieving God card, and he was quite hungry after a long battle. 2 Snake Demon Longswords. More than 10 Kindler, 3 books, 3 cards, and 1 Ogre Bracer of Strength. Soren was quite satisfied with the loot from this adventure, even though there were some accidents that almost cost him his life. But if he could sell these loot, it should be enough for him and Vivian to become free citizens. At the same time, he also bought some necessities. For example, a small multidimensional bag with 3 feet of storage space. This was a necessary item for adventuring in the wild. It was worth around 100 Kindler. It was sold in secret shops in every city, and it could be used to store some daily necessities. It was impossible to carry everything back from an adventure in the wild, so the small multidimensional bag had about 1 cubic meter of storage space, which was enough to store some of the loot. Otherwise, 20 Kindler would weigh 1 pound, and sometimes the Kindler alone would weigh 1 to 200 pounds. Are you sure you can still walk with all these Kindler on your back? Creak. The heavy secret door slowly opened, and Soren appeared with 2 longswords on his back and a small bag on his back. It was packed with the clothes of the dead. He looked around vigilantly, and then headed toward Amber City. But As soon as he walked out of the mass grave, he heard a faint moaning sound coming from in front of him. It was a woman's moaning. Because it was very quiet, the sound traveled quite far. He silently put his hand on the hilt of his sword and pulled it out from his back. His muscles tensed up, and he looked around, ready to fight. This was a mass grave. Who would come here in the middle of the night to have sex? There was a limit to the thrill and the hardcore. He was afraid that he had encountered something unclean. Chapter 19. Soren saw a woman. Or rather, it was a seductive woman who wore revealing clothes. She had light blonde hair, and her exposed skin was unusually pale. She was leaning against a tree, and a young man was kissing her with his head lowered. Most of her white breasts were exposed, and under the cold moonlight, one could even see the light green veins on her body. Soren's footsteps were very light. But the seductive woman still easily noticed him. She raised her head and revealed her green eyes. She stuck out her tongue and licked her dark red lips. She playfully said, "It seems that I'm very lucky today." The young man who was enjoying himself in front of her chest didn't notice her at all. It was as if the fullness in front of him had attracted all of his attention. Soren stopped. He stared at the seductive woman not far away. She didn't move, so he didn't move either. She was a blood descendant. A servant raised by vampires. Her strength was far stronger than a low-level blood thrall. Although there were many stories that glorified vampires, in the eyes of adventurers, they were still dangerous and evil creatures. A blood descendant's challenge rating was 8, and their level was 16. They belonged to the silver species and had powerful spell-like abilities. A blood descendant's challenge rating was 6, and their level was 12. They had some of the vampire's abilities. Vampires were masters in controlling negative energy. Their reproduction had a strict hierarchy. Many creatures that were considered as vampires in the outside world were actually blood descendants of a lower level. These creatures that didn't inherit the true blood needed a long time to reach the standard of a blood descendant. The fangs of vampires had a deadly poison. Although they secretly manipulated many scholars to glorify the dark pleasure of being sucked blood, it still couldn't change the fact that the victim would gradually be eroded by the poison and become a blood thrall. This poison would turn humans into half-undead creatures. Their consciousness would gradually disappear, and they would eventually become monsters that supplied blood. They were dangerous and deadly. Soren had fought vampires more than once. Vampires were one of the most active creatures in the dark domain. They could be found in almost every city. High-level vampires would disguise themselves as human nobles, while low-level vampires would hide in basements, sewers, and graveyards. They were like predators in the dark. There was a brief silence. The young man in front of the seductive woman's chest seemed to be engulfed in lust. He did not notice that the atmosphere around him had become heavy and oppressive. He was under the spell of a charmed person, and his mind had long been burned by lust and fire. Mind-type spells required a flaw in the target's willpower. Vampires were best at using their appearance to confuse their prey, using teasing to arouse their desires, and finally lowering their target's willpower. Then, in an instant, they could cast a charm spell to control their target's mind. Willpower was a force. A strong will could even affect the elemental energy of nature. Soren didn't pay any attention to the pitiful prey. He was calculating his chances of winning against the bloodkin. The bloodkin's agility was probably higher than his, and its strength was far beyond the range of a normal person. Furthermore, the bloodkin had a strong sense of evasion. In terms of strength, it wasn't any weaker than the snake demon from the abyss. Taking into account the injuries on his legs, Soren concluded that he had no chance of winning. Then, there was only one way. Soren slightly bent down and put the index and middle fingers of his left hand on his collarbone. He slowly said, "Shadow shroud the world. The masked messenger in the darkness is watching us. Glory. Return to the invisible ruler." The seductive woman's playful smile gradually disappeared. She slightly frowned and looked deeply at Soren in front of her. She said in a deep voice, "Night will decide our fate. The ancestors will guide us. Mistress of the night. Protect her followers. Success." Soren's heart was filled with joy, but his expression didn't change at all. He slightly nodded and took a step back to show that he didn't have any ill intentions. At the same time, he bowed and said, "Esteemed mistress. May the night always watch over you. Please enjoy your dinner in peace. No one will disturb you." After saying that, he turned around and left in another direction. The seductive woman kept looking at his back. Her expression seemed to have a trace of hesitation, but in the end, she gave up on the plan in her heart. Her eyes fell on the young man who was wantonly ravaging her chest. She opened her mouth, revealing her sharp fangs. Her expression showed a trace of greed and desire. She deeply pierced the prey's artery. Large amounts of blood flowed into her mouth. The seductive woman's face showed a trace of satisfaction and intoxication. The young man in her arms still didn't notice. He was still immersed in the pleasure and didn't know that death was coming. A hungry blood descendant. It was difficult for the prey to survive until the dawn of the next day. From beginning to end. Soren didn't even look at the poor man until he left the mass grave. Only then did he collapse and let out a long sigh of relief. The words he just said were the code of the Shadow Mask. It was a powerful organization that controlled the Grey Realm. The Dark Realm and the Grey Realm intersected the most. The number of times the thieves dealt with the Dark Realm was not small. If the other side didn't respond, then a battle was inevitable. But if the other side responded, it meant that she knew about the existence of the Shadow Mask. It was very likely that this battle would be avoided. What Soren just said was actually a code. The former meant that he was a member of the Shadow Mask organization, including his gestures and language. The latter meant that he believed in the Shadow Master. Only the core members knew that the Shadow Master didn't have a physical body. Similarly, the Blood Descendant understood the meaning of the code, which was why she had hesitated before making a move. In the end, she chose to let Soren leave. From the other side's code, Soren knew that she was a blood descendant raised by a high-grade vampire who had the bloodline of an ancestor. At the same time, she was also a follower of the Mistress of the Night. The Shadow Master was an ally of the Mistress of the Night. The relationship between the two gods was quite good, so there were very few conflicts between their followers. If you added the fear of the Shadow Mask, then it was enough to make the other side give up on this extra hunting plan. More importantly, Soren's attitude clearly indicated that he would let her enjoy her dinner. He didn't have the slightest intention of meddling in other people's business. He took a step back to show that he didn't have any hostility and didn't want to fight. The hidden meaning was that since she had already found her dinner, did she really want to take the risk of offending the Shadow Mask by hunting a follower of the Shadow Master? Of course. Soren wasn't a member of the Shadow Mask, nor was he a follower of the Shadow Master. He was actually lying. But this should be the best way. The only way to solve problems wasn't to fight. If Soren was an idiot who only knew how to fight, he wouldn't have been able to reach the legendary realm. In this world where saints walked everywhere and liches were as common as dogs, there were countless existences that were stronger than him. Even the possibility of encountering a god was very high. Defeating the strong with the weak. Sometimes, there was no other way. For example, when encountering those chaotic and evil demons, these creatures had their own crazy attributes and were very difficult to negotiate with. So when the situation allowed, there were many times when you had to learn how to avoid fighting. At the very least, you could avoid those battles where you had no chance of winning. Until he was sure that he was safe. Soren finally let out a sigh of relief. At the same time, he found that there seemed to be something new on his status page. The first sentence seemed to have appeared when he left the treasure cave. At that time, he was alerted by the strange sound and didn't see this message. What appeared was exploration successful. After a difficult underground adventure, your skills have improved to a certain extent. Sneak +1, trap +1. These were the words in the first row. Then, there were the words that appeared after he escaped from the blood descendants and avoided a battle where he had no chance of winning. What was displayed here was, negotiation successful. You successfully deceived a powerful blood descendant. You avoided a battle. Negotiation +1, deception +3, performance +1. A row of data appeared. Then, Soren found that on his status page, other than the original thief skills, there were some additional skills. Basic skills: Sneak 103, Steal 35, Pick Lock 45, Trap 55, Negotiation 1, Deception 3, Performance 1. This works too. Soren's face showed a hint of surprise. Chapter 20. Amber City was unusually quiet at night. Ever since the skinning incident, no one dared to come out at night in Amber City or nearby areas. Even those who were active in the Grey Realm were now on tenterhooks in their own territories. The Dark Realm was made up of pure evil and chaotic lunatics. Although the Grey Realm had a lot of contact with them, they had always maintained their boundaries. The guards of Amber City had yet to find anything. Not only did the nobles repeatedly ask them to solve the problem as soon as possible, but the church also began to put pressure on them. Panic spread further, and the Church of Amber City finally lost patience with the guards and began to send their own paladins to investigate. Unfortunately, those evil beings were extremely cunning. Not only did they not find any clues, but they also lost a comrade. Their comrade's corpse was hung on the city gate the next day, and next to it was a complete human skin. Fear brewed in the night. The attack of the evil god's followers on the paladins eventually led to the church's wrath. The churches of the three lawful gods began to send out high-level paladins, and even the bishops in charge of the nearby areas joined in the action. At the same time, in a secret underground chamber, there were many strange carvings on the four walls. There were bones, lava, demons, altars, and the shadow of a demon shrouded in darkness. Dark phosphorescent flames flickered, casting an eerie light on the surroundings. A group of believers in black robes knelt under the altar, their hands crossed as they prayed on the ground. On the altar was a red-robed priest whose face could not be seen clearly. He held a crystal ball in his pale hand, and his mouth was chanting ancient demonic language. Lord High Priest. According to the prophecy left by our Lord, the first child of fear will awaken in despair and fear. But we did not sense the presence of the child of fear. The skinning ritual has begun. The aura of fear is spreading in this city. But the paladins of the church are about to discover us. We have already lost some people. Now, should we continue with the ritual? To wait for the awakening of the child of fear? A ball of demonic purple flame appeared. A hoarse voice that could not be identified reverberated throughout the secret chamber. It slowly said, "The prophecy has been interfered with. The gods seem to have sensed my lord's arrangements. Continue the sacred skinning ritual and spread the power of fear to the southern principality. The second child of fear will awaken on a certain sunset." The red-robed priest knelt down piously. He looked forward with a firm gaze and said in a deep voice, "The ceremony will continue. My lords shall envelop the abyss." Below the altar, the believers of the evil god kneeling on the ground began to pray, and waves of evil energy gathered in this secret room. No one was allowed to enter Amber City at night. Especially after the skinning incident, more guards were placed at the city gate, and the activities of other people were strictly interrogated. Therefore, Soren had to stay outside the city for a night and find a way to enter the temple district the next day. Dawn Shrine. A faint radiance enveloped the hall. The surroundings were filled with an aura of tranquility, serenity, and hope. This was a solidified blessing spell. With the help of the divine power gathered in the temple, believers could feel spiritual satisfaction after entering it. A small figure knelt in front of a tall and majestic statue. Priestess Annalyn slowly opened the door and looked at the little girl in front of the shrine. She whispered, "Vivian. Are you praying to the Lord of Dawn?" The little girl gently raised her head and looked at the girl behind her. She nodded obediently and said, "Yes. I'm praying that he will protect my brother. Although Soren did not say it, Vivian knew that he was going to do something very dangerous. The little girl did not try to stop him. She just prayed for Soren in her heart and prayed that the gods would bring him a trace of luck. No matter what god it was, it would do. The priestess walked to her side and reached out to stroke her little head. She said slowly, "Then you should pray at dawn. The Lord of Dawn will listen to the prayers of his believers at that time." The little girl nodded as if she understood and said, "That's good. Sister, please pray with me tomorrow." Annalyn looked at the cute little girl in front of her and nodded with a smile. She then said, "Vivian, are you willing to believe in the Lord of Dawn? I can feel that you have a unique talent. Perhaps you have the potential to become a priestess. If you are willing to serve the Lord of Dawn, your family can also be accommodated by the shrine. Perhaps Soren can find a better job in the future. After all, he is quite skilled." The little girl fell into deep thought after hearing this. She seemed to be a little tempted, but she quickly replied, "I want to ask my brother before I make a decision. If my brother agrees, I would like to give it a try." She did not know why. When Vivian said, "Give it a try," she felt an inexplicable sense of rejection in her heart. She had been very perceptive since she was young. However, she did not know why, but she did not like the gods. That was why she and Soren were both non-believers. They did not even believe in a god on the surface. The little girl did not know why, but she felt that if she was asked to believe in them, she would feel uncomfortable. For example, the light in the temple was very comfortable when it shone on people, but she still didn't like it. If it were not for the fact that she wanted to pray for Soren, she would not even want to enter the shrine. "That's good." The priestess showed a hint of joy. She reached out to pull her up and said slowly, "Perhaps you can try to understand some of the most basic divine spells. For example, this. Ua." Annalyn uttered a strange syllable. Then, a ray of light appeared on her fingertips. The light was like a candlelight, illuminating everything nearby. "This is illumination." The priestess smiled as she looked at the little girl in front of her. "It's a very simple divine spell. If you have the talent to become a priestess, you should be able to master it quickly. However, you have to undergo baptism first. The holy ceremony will allow you to feel the power of the gods." The baptism ceremony was the key to becoming a priestess. It was a process of strengthening and magnifying one's senses. During this process, those who had the talent to become a priestess would be able to feel the power of the divine spell. This included paladins, rangers, and other professions. They would be able to gradually master some low-level divine spells after this ceremony. However, this was only the beginning of the ceremony. There would be more important holy ceremonies for the priestess to advance. Clang. A loud noise outside the hall interrupted the priestess' words. Then, a fully armored paladin walked in. The armor on his body was unusually heavy. When he walked in, it made clanging sounds. There was a trace of blood on his resolute face. After entering the hall, he said to Annalyn in a deep voice, "Matos is injured. We found the nest of the fallen. Matos was stabbed in the heart during the battle." Sophia's expression changed slightly. She looked at Vivian and said, "Go back to your room later. Lasco. Bring me there." The two quickly left. Recently, the followers of the evil god had been very rampant. The evil skinning ceremony had alarmed many paladins. The Dawnlight Shrine's paladins had also participated in the operation. Matos was a Tier 3 paladin. His profession level was above level 10. Even he was heavily injured in the battle. It seemed that the followers of the evil god were very powerful this time. Vivian silently watched the two leave. After they left, she raised her white and tender fingertips and muttered to herself, "Ua. Can I use divine spells just by saying this syllable?" A strong light appeared. The little girl opened her mouth wide in shock. She looked at the light that erupted from her fingertips. She seemed to be in disbelief. She seemed to be a little scared. He quickly flicked his finger, as if trying to extinguish the light. However, she quickly adapted to it. She curiously looked at her fingertips and muttered, "Is it really that simple? Can I use divine spells just like this?" Chapter 21. Soren's wounds healed quite well. By the second day, there were basically no traces of his wounds when he walked. Only when he exercised vigorously would he feel a little inconvenience. If the wounds didn't open up, it would take at most 2 days for him to fully recover. This was the main reason why Soren wanted to increase his constitution by 20 points. If he could increase his constitution by 1 point, he could completely recover from this degree of injury within a day with his regeneration ability. After all, the treasure cave was only a low-level adventure location. If he wanted to go deep into some underground ruins or a higher-level adventure location, it could even take more than a month. This included not only the time spent exploring the ruins, but also the survival events encountered on the way, as well as the possibility of accidents. Therefore, constitution greatly affected the survival ability of adventurers. For example, Soren once met an idiotic mage who actually used enhanced bursting fireball in a narrow underground cave. In the end, the whole cave collapsed. Although his teammates were all high-grade professions, there were no casualties. However, they were trapped underground for an entire week. In the end, they had to dig out a tunnel with their bare hands. So, please remember to stay away from those mages with low IQ. Sometimes, they were more dangerous than monsters. Of course, this wasn't the worst thing. Even worse was the work of a priest. He actually used an earthquake spell in the underground ruins. In the end, a large area of the underground ruins collapsed. Most of the loot was destroyed by the earthquake, and all of his teammates were buried hundreds of meters underground. In the end, only a special dwarf warrior with more than 25 constitution crawled out alive. This priest was finally known as the worst creature, and it could be said that he was the nightmare of all adventurers. However, basically, this kind of behavior was done by the players. The original inhabitants of the story were all experts. Sometimes, they could even use a low-level spell to turn the situation around. Unfortunately, the original inhabitants of the story were the most difficult to become teammates. Before Soren went to pick up Vivian, he first went to the secret shop. The city gate was heavily guarded, and they took the traveling expenses of outsiders very seriously. After the skinning incident started to ferment, there were already signs of it becoming more and more serious. However, Soren knew that all this was just the beginning. In his memory, the skinning incident was an evil chain of sacrificial rituals. The final scope of the incident covered the entire southern region. There were a total of 6 kingdoms, 18 duchies, 31 city-states, and more than 300 cities. At that time, there were at least 200,000 players involved in the plot, and more than 20 legendary professions were directly drawn out. It could be said that this period of time was when the players were at their weakest. Soren carefully recalled everything in his memory, trying to deduce the current time. The skinning incident had just begun, and the ancient red dragon had yet to appear. In other words, there was still about a year before the gods lost their divine powers and were forced to descend as saints. In addition to some special events, he should have about 2 years to accumulate strength. 2 years later, something very serious was about to happen. The goddess of magic had fallen, and the magic net had completely collapsed. All wizards had temporarily lost their ability to cast spells. The goddess of magic was a powerful deity, and she was also the first to be hit during the Age of Chaos. She was in charge of the magic net in countless planes, and she helped wizards cast spells. This was the spell slot ability that the adepts were using now. There were many wizards at this stage, so basically every city had a secret shop. It was only after the goddess of magic had fallen that the number of wizards began to decrease. With the fall of the goddess of magic, the magic net had lost its maintainer, and the magic net began to collapse on a large scale, causing wizards to completely lose their spell slots. All adepts with intelligence below 18 will lose the ability to cast spells. All wizards with intelligence below 20 would only be able to cast the lowest level of level 0 cantrips. Only wizards with intelligence above 20 would be able to use their own ability to observe and analyze the laws of the world, and then gradually recover their ability to cast spells. However, at that time, they would no longer use the spell slots on the magic net, but their own mana and understanding of the laws. The magic net was a convenience, but it was also a restriction on the power of spells. It could allow wizards with insufficient talent, intelligence below 18, to cast spells more easily, but at the same time, it also restricted powerful wizards, intelligence above 18, from becoming terrifying great arcanists. Ever since then, wizards began to walk towards two extremes, either extremely useless or extremely abnormal. However, these were all things for the future. At this stage, the magic net was still operating normally. All wizards gave their mana to the magic net, borrowing the power of the goddess of magic in exchange for spell slots. Although this required them to frequently memorize spells. Soren sorted out his memories in his mind, because the fall of the goddess of magic was a very important event. The resulting turbulence affected countless planes. During that time, the value of rare items soared several times. Now, the value of a low-level multidimensional bag that cost 100 Kindler coins could skyrocket to more than 500 Kindler coins. Because with the fall of the goddess of magic, many gods also fell in the mortal world. Many priests and droll also lost their ability to cast spells. Only those who had broken through 20 points in related attributes and entered the realm of transcendence could rely on their own strength to gain insight into the world's rules. Gradually recover their ability to cast spells. This period was not far away. If Soren remembered correctly, the goddess of magic was the first to fall, and wizards would soon lose their ability to cast spells. Then, the era of arcane revival would begin. The arcane shop was actually very inconspicuous. This was because wizards did not like to communicate with ordinary people, and even other professions found it difficult to come into contact with them. Among all the spellcasting professions, only priests were more down to earth. Soren gently pushed open a wooden door. The inside of the arcane shop was very spacious, and there were only a few counters with some enchanted equipment. There were actually very few customers here. This was because the items here were very expensive, and ordinary people could not afford them. For sale or for purchase? An old man lazily glanced at Soren. He wore a pair of glasses and held a book as thick as a brick in his hand. After looking up at Soren, he said indifferently, "If you're selling enchanted equipment, let me evaluate its value. If you're buying enchanted equipment, feel free to look around." The arcane shop was established by the Wizard Alliance, and it was basically located in most cities. There were wizards above grade 2 who would rotate every once in a while. At this time, the Wizard Alliance was still relatively strong and prosperous. After the fall of the goddess of magic, their strength began to decline on a large scale. At that time, many people took advantage of the situation to rob the arcane shop. But now, doing so would be suicide. The old man seemed to have seen through Soren's profession and reminded him, "Don't touch the things here. There are magic traps on them." Everyone knew that a thief's hands were the most dishonest. Of course, Soren would not seek death. Instead, he took out the two snake demon longswords from his back and directly placed them in front of the old man. This was a grade 3 wizard. His profession should be above grade 10 scholar or grade 10 wizard. Killing Soren would only be a matter of minutes. The old man glanced at the snake demon longswords and showed a hint of surprise. He whispered, "Abyssal fire rock?" He struggled to pick up the longsword and touched the blade with his finger. Wizards did not have high strength, and their constitution was also much lower than other professions. Only after reaching the realm of legends could they strengthen themselves through special rituals. The old man carefully observed for a moment, then retracted his finger and said, "Such a material is actually used to forge weapons. It's a bit of a waste." The old man glanced at Soren and did not ask about the origin of the weapon. He only said, 80 Kindler. The arcane shop had its own channels. As long as it was a rare grade equipment, they would accept it without asking about its origin, whether it was stolen goods or not. Wizards never complained about having too much money. They spent it even faster, 120 Kindler. After hearing the old man's price, Soren could not help but frown. He slowly said, "This sword was forged from abyssal fire rock. According to the rules of weapon pricing, the price of great swords should be around 50%. Whether this sword is sold or recycled, it should be worth 200 Kindler or more. If it can be transported to the north or the grasslands, it can be worth 300 Kindler. That's more than double the profit. 80 Kindler is too little. If it was sold to the thieves' union, the price would be even higher." The old man looked at Soren with a bit of surprise. He then said, "You know the market. That's good. 120 Kindler it is." The old man gently shook the bell, and then a heavy figure walked out from behind. It was a stone golem about 2 meters tall, a type of alchemical construct. The golem took the snake demon's sword with both hands and walked through the back door. It then carried an inconspicuous bag behind the old man. It was a multidimensional bag. The old man reached out and opened the multidimensional bag, pouring it out onto the counter. A pile of Kindler glittering with golden light appeared. He glanced at it and waved his finger. The Kindler was divided into 2 piles. The small pile flew into the multidimensional bag, and the big pile was pushed in front of Soren. Mage Hand. It was a very convenient ability. Mages were indeed rich. After the old man took the 2 snake demon swords, he looked back at the book and said casually, "Feel free to look around. If you want to buy anything, just let me know." 240 Kindler. There was a small pile of Kindler weighing 12 pounds, about 5 kilograms. It was not convenient to carry them around. Sometimes it would even affect one's fighting ability. Soren reached out and took out a small half of the pile, exactly 100 Kindler. He then said, "I want a low-level multidimensional bag." The old man nodded and put away the Kindler. He then took out an inconspicuous bag from the drawer. "Be careful not to damage it." He glanced at Soren. Perhaps because he found him pleasing to the eye, he reminded him, "It's only protected by the lowest level of enchantment. It won't be damaged by normal use, but if it's damaged by someone, the things inside will fall out." Soren nodded and put away the 140 Kindler. A low-level multidimensional bag had a space of 3 feet. The size of the pocket was about half a foot, and it could store smaller things. If it was damaged in an attack, it would lose its storage ability. The small space inside would collapse, and the items would fall out. They could even be lost in a spatial rift. There was a high chance that rare items below legendary would be damaged. Even Soren's ogre gauntlet could be damaged in a battle. Some of them could even be damaged beyond repair. The trade was complete. Soren quickly left the arcane shop and walked towards the blacksmith shop near the square. He needed a machete. It was difficult to buy a rare machete in the south. He could only buy a military machete for now. A row of data appeared, negotiation successful. You have successfully raised the value of the item through negotiation. Valuation +1, negotiation +1. Chapter 22. Amber City. As a city that had been established for more than 600 years, Amber City's history began when the Agate River changed its course. Due to the large-scale desertification of the plains upstream and the epic scale of the Mad Serpent Rebellion, the relationship between the human kingdoms and the Droll worsened, and the Agate River's course was shifted by nearly 60 kilometers. Even to this day, the Drolls still restricted humans from destroying the natural environment, and when necessary, they would resort to violence. The change of the Agate River's course led to the decline of a city, but it also led to the rise of Amber City. Unlike the dirty and messy slums, Amber City's streets were much wider and cleaner. The paved roads could allow 10 carriages to pass at the same time. However, such cleanliness was built on driving away the homeless and poor. Every time they entered Amber City, they would have to spend a copper droll. The poor and vagrants of the lower class could not afford that kind of money. Even if they were lucky enough to sneak into the city, they would be caught patrolling at night and thrown out by the guards again. Such situations were common in the southern cities. The inside and outside of the city were two completely different worlds. As for the noble district, it was as beautiful as a garden. Flowers and trees were planted on both sides of the road, and tall buildings and exquisite sculptures could be seen everywhere. Even Soren could not enter the district as it was guarded by nobles. The Great Square was Amber City's big market. It was responsible for trading goods transported from all over the world, and it brought in a lot of taxes to Amber City every year. At the same time, it also ensured that the nobles had a source of income. The annual income of a manor was less than 10 Kindler coins. For the nobles, the best way to accumulate wealth and strengthen their families was to get involved in the transportation trade on the Agate River. Soren saw many heavily guarded guards along the way. The skinning incident had caused Amber City to seem a little desolate. After hurriedly selling their goods, the merchants left the city. Their past experiences told them that there would always be many troublesome and dangerous things happening in the area where the realm of darkness was active. Directly opposite the Great Square was the Adventurers Guild. It was a large and loose organization that was spread all over the world, but the management staff was formed by various forces. Be it kingdoms, nobles, churches, or other organizations scattered all over the world, none of them would allow the Adventurers Guild to form a complete will. Therefore, they had to ensure that there was a force of their own in this large and loose organization. The Adventurers Guild was made up of various boards, and each area operated independently. For example, the Adventurers Guild in Amber City covered all the jobs within a 500-kilometer radius, including 3 cities, 21 towns, and more than 100 villages. The members of the council were controlled by nobles, churches, local forces, and so on. They were on the same level as the Adventurers Guilds all over the world, but they maintained some agreements of common interests. Soren needed an adventurer's identity. There were no requirements to become an adventurer, and there was no strength evaluation. You just needed to be able to afford the application fee. There were a total of 10 Kindlers. It was enough to sustain a family of 3 for 3 years. All adventurers started from F class and had a secret imprint on them that could be verified by adventurer guilds all over the world. Of course, if you are strong enough, you can also forge it. The biggest use of an adventurer's identity was a pass, because there were many places that you could not go as you wished. This world had a strong sense of geography. The movement of people was also very slow because there were too many dangers in the wild. Many ordinary people would never leave their homes for more than 10 kilometers in their lifetime. If you only wanted to move around your home, you would not need those things. But if you wanted to go to other places, there were 2 things that you had to prepare. The first was an identity of a free person, and the second was an identity of an adventurer. These 2 things could eliminate a lot of hostility and trouble. Of course, if you could get a noble's identity, it would be even easier. You could also pretend to be one. As long as you did not expose yourself, it would be very troublesome. Soren first needed to prepare an adventurer's identity for himself, and then he and Vivian's identity as free people. This way, they could move freely in most of the southern areas. If you did not have these things, many towns and villages would refuse to let you in. Even if you had these identities, if you entered places that were more xenophobic and had a strong sense of geography, there would still be garrison captains who would talk to you. Then they would seriously warn you not to cause trouble here. That was true. Because at that time, many people excitedly went out to adventure, and then everywhere they went, they would be checked again and again. In the end, they would become the focus of attention. As long as you did something wrong, there would immediately be local residents who would report to the garrison, and then there would be fully armed soldiers who would come to talk to you. If you did not really come into contact with it, it was hard to imagine how troublesome it was. There were not many people in the Adventurers Guild. Because this was a dangerous job, and it was also a job that was easy to retire from. As long as there was an accident in battle, your body could be left with injuries that were difficult to recover from, and then your strength would be greatly reduced. If you were unable to pay for the expensive treatment, then you should be ready to retire. The Adventurers Guild had countless F-class adventurers, but only 1 in 10 could reach E-class, and less than 1 in 100 could reach D-class. However, if you had the identity of an E-class adventurer, and a clean family background with no criminal record, then you could easily find a job as a guard near a town. Although the income was not as good as that of an adventurer, it was still a reliable source of income. It was enough for you to get married, have children, and have children. After all, not everyone had the desire to take risks, and the risks were taken with their lives. The missions that were posted here were more formal. Many of the low-level missions were privately entrusted to individuals, and would not be handled by the Adventurers Guild. The lowest level of mission here was F-class, and the difficulty of the mission was generally above level 5. For example, the mission that Soren saw in front of him was recorded as follows: a village called Snada, which belongs to Lord Tenedo's territory. Recently, a group of goblins appeared, and there were traces of gnolls among them. The village's militia could not fight these monsters, so they offered 50 kindlers coins as a reward to the adventurers to clear these monsters. Mission rating, F+. This was only the basic description of the mission. If you wanted to accept the mission, you had to consider whether you could defeat a group of goblins, more than 20 of them, and a single-digit number of gnolls, 1 to 5 of them. This was only the beginning. If you decided to accept the mission and head to the destination, you had to find out if the number of enemies was as high as they said. If there were so many of them, you could prepare a battle plan now. But if the number of enemies was much higher than what was recorded, you had to make a decision whether to give up the mission and ask for compensation, travel expenses, or continue the mission and ask for more rewards, negotiation. Or you could not care less, and be prepared to take the money and leave after solving the problem. Soren still remembered the first time he accepted a mission. At that time, he found 2 companions, and the difficulty of the mission was similar to the one he was facing now. But in the end, an ogre appeared. He had almost lost his life there. If the client did not raise the reward by 50% in the end, he even had the intention to kill the client. This was not a joke. Soren had done it before. He once hung a client who lied to him about the difficulty of the mission and caused the death of one of his teammates on a flagpole. He whipped the client to death, and hung the corpse for 3 days and 3 nights. That was his first storyline native teammate, a big boy named Sheb who smiled a little shyly. He had 2 younger brothers and a younger sister. Before persuading him to become a teammate and leave the village, Soren had promised his mother that he would earn enough money to repair the damaged village after the mountain flood, and then return safely. He was the only professional in the remote village, a level 6 excellent warrior. He saved Soren's life once, blocked 3 arrows for him, and in the end, fell into the encirclement in order to protect him. When Soren found him, only half of his corpse was left after being eaten by the gnolls. Even the whole corpse could not be found. That day, Soren killed many people. But revenge did not ease the pain in his heart. In the end, he could only cremate his comrades' ashes and send them back to his hometown. More than 1,000 kindlers reward from the mission did not give him the courage to face the sad face of a poor mother who lost her child. He had promised that he would bring the shy boy back alive, but in the end, he only brought back a handful of ashes. At that moment, Soren clearly understood how cruel the world was. As a rogue, he would never let his guard down, and would never easily trust anyone. Because he had already missed his chance. Perhaps it was because of this that he was able to stand out from the other rogues, and finally become one of the few legendary rogues among the players. Chapter 23. The Adventurers Guild didn't have any quests to look for Tom, Dick, or Harry. This was a place where people risked their lives in exchange for riches and honor. Even the lowest level quests could earn them more than 10 kindler coins. It was enough to feed a normal family for 3 years. Soren didn't accept any quests. After proving his identity and receiving the badge of the Adventurers Guild, he went straight to the city hall. He needed to get himself and Vivian an identity certificate as free citizens, which cost about 15 kindler coins. Then, he would be considered a citizen of Amber City, officially turning from a pauper to a citizen. He would have relative freedom and could move around most of the kingdoms in the south if he didn't have to worry about the dangers in the wild. However, he couldn't touch any quests yet. In Clash of the Titans, there was no such thing as farming monsters. The number of monsters in the wild was about the same as the number of humans. Once you cleared an area of gnolls, there would be no traces of gnolls for a long time until the gnolls from other areas migrated over. Monsters wouldn't stand in a row and eat fruits with you. They would set up traps, ambush you, surround you, set up camps, and run away when the situation wasn't right. There was once such a saying in a tavern. A newbie who hasn't fallen into a kobold's trap, been surrounded by a group of goblins, and been ambushed by gnolls in the middle of the night won't have a complete adventuring career. Behind this saying was a bloody price to pay. Many newbies who had just leveled up to Tier 2 excitedly went out adventuring, only to lose their lives at the hands of the lowest level monsters. Can you imagine a group of monsters that didn't follow the rules? They attacked when they saw a lone player and ran when they saw a large group. They knew how to take advantage of the environment. They could even make bombs, set up simple traps in the forest, investigate, ambush, beg for mercy, and cheat. If you were unlucky. Even among the level 1 kobolds, it was possible to meet a talented dragon disciple warlock. Even if they were only level 5, they could still blast you to smithereens. In the wild, complex and unpredictable situations, even the prideful spellcasters didn't dare to think that they could deal with all the unexpected situations. As long as one had money, many problems would become simple. Soren didn't have any trouble obtaining his identity as a freedman. As long as he didn't have a criminal record, the staff of the city hall would be able to help him with everything in half an hour and stamp it with the secret seal of the city lord. They didn't care if Soren used to be a thief or not. They only cared about the shiny kindler. Even if he had a criminal record, it could be easily erased. The so-called freedmen were actually just people who spent money to buy an identity. If you had more money, you could even buy the title of honorary citizen through donations, just like the representatives. Many of the leaders of the gangs were prominent figures in the city. Even if they didn't have the title of nobility, they would still have the title of honorary citizen. With the identity of an adventurer, things would be much easier. Soren could directly purchase military weapons from the smithy. The price of these weapons was several times higher than normal weapons, and their quality was also higher. The public sale of weapons was legal. This was because ordinary people couldn't afford these weapons at all, and they wouldn't be willing to buy such expensive equipment. A military-issue machete cost 15 gold dirhams. It was made with the folding and refining of steel, and it didn't have any extraordinary enchantments. It weighed about 6 pounds and was mixed with a certain amount of black steel. This was the price of a standard weapon. A military chainmail was made with the buckle process, and it weighed about 15 pounds. It also didn't have any extraordinary enchantments, and it cost 80 kindler, which was equivalent to the entire fortune of an ordinary citizen. The price of a standard building in the outer district of Amber City was currently around 30 to 50 kindler. As for the more advanced plate armor and full-body plate armor, it was something that many warriors had worked hard to obtain for a long time. It was more expensive than many extraordinary equipment. A full-body plate armor cost 1,500 to 2,000 kindler. Currently, only the nobles, lesser lords, could equip themselves with such armor. Even many high-grade adventurers couldn't afford it. Such plate armor could be exchanged for a small farm of about 150 acres. After Soren finished his business, he had spent half a day. He still had nearly 100 kindler left in his pocket. This was not a small fortune. If it was just an ordinary life, it would be enough for him and Vivian to live for more than 10 years. However, Soren already had his own ideas, so he had to prepare some daily necessities and wilderness supplies. Yes. He planned to leave here. According to his memory, the turmoil caused by the cereal skinning incident was far more than this. The entire southern region would gradually be filled with war. The safest place now was the Elven Kingdom. At least that was the case before the ancient red dragon appeared. The Avatar crisis couldn't be stopped at all. If he didn't want to be obliterated like an ant, then the best way was to leave the turbulent area and accumulate strength in a relatively safe place. Once upon a time, about 3 million players directly interfered and joined the turbulent era of the Avatar Crisis. At that time, the most powerful player among the players had a profession level of 18. It could be said that he was only half a step away from legendary, but he was still easily obliterated by those saints. It was impossible to calculate how many people died. Tens of millions of professionals were obliterated like chickens and dogs. This was not something that could be changed by human power. Leave. It was the wisest choice. Soren still remembered how powerless he was when he fought against the Son of God. It was not a battle at all. Only after entering the legendary realm could he really have the power to challenge divinity. He entered the Elven Kingdom from the Forest of Dreams, and then turned to the Snow Kingdom, avoiding the most chaotic 3 years, waiting for the first batch of gods to fall. At that time, the broken divinity would be obtained by many mortals. These mortals who had divinity but lacked power. They would be the easiest targets to hunt. This was the biggest opportunity in the turbulent years. Soren didn't grasp it before, but now he could start to plan in advance. The Temple District. When he went to the Temple of Dawn to pick up Vivian, Soren was also playing with the weapon he had just obtained. He needed to familiarize himself with the weapon's length, weight, and feel to ensure that he could use it properly in battle. It was good that he had the military weapon mastery ability, but the weight and feel of each weapon was different. Even if it was standard military equipment, there would still be some slight differences in it. These were very important details, because fighting was a matter of life and death in an instant. A row of data appeared in front of him: item type, military machete, item grade, refined weapon, item description, a weapon made of folded forged steel. Whether in terms of toughness or strength, it is far superior to ordinary weapons. Only those blacksmiths with 150 weapon smithing skill and above can forge such equipment. Requirements: 10 strength or above. Effects: black steel trait, +1 sharpness. Strictly speaking, this machete was somewhat enchanted because it had a black steel trait, which meant that it had a certain degree of strength. In the process of battle, the weapon would not be easily damaged, and it could withstand a lot of slashing attacks. As for the +1 sharpness at the back, it was an attribute of a refined weapon, which could easily penetrate some leather armor. When Soren arrived at the Dawnlight Shrine, he realized that the atmosphere inside was unusually solemn. Pastor Phil was conducting a funeral for a shrine guard. 5 heavily armored warriors stood around him with solemn expressions, their hands holding onto their swords as they stabbed into the ground. Their mottled cloaks were still stained with dried blood. When the pastor finished his last prayer, they knelt on one knee on the ground. Their armor made a clanking sound as they looked forward and solemnly said, "Go forward courageously, do not fear the strong. Protect the weak, uphold justice. Treat others humbly, be honest and loyal. My beloved, be loyal and unswerving. Brave and righteous, rather die than submit. In the name of God, I swear to show my sincerity." The powerful words of the vow echoed in the shrine. Pastor Phil slowly closed the eyes of the deceased. This was a paladin of the Dawnlight Shrine. His hands were holding onto the hilt of his sword in front of his chest. He was wearing a neat set of armor. Although the bloodstains had been wiped clean, there were still many traces of battle left behind. The coffin was very simple. There were no flowers or decorations. The only things buried with him were his armor and weapons. Armor and weapons were a warrior's second life. These equipment that had accompanied him in battle would be buried with him. May his soul enter the kingdom of the Dawnlight Shrine as soon as possible. Pastor Phil raised his hand and sprinkled some holy water. As the pastor prayed, a ray of holy light shone from the shrine. This meant that the Dawnlight Shrine knew that a brave believer had died in battle. His emissary would guide this warrior's soul into the kingdom of God. There, the warrior's soul would be reborn. The purer the soul, the more powerful it would be in the kingdom of God. The descent of holy light? Looks like he was very determined when he was alive. After the kingdom of God was reborn, he wasn't just a petitioner. Soren looked around and quickly found Vivian's small figure. She was standing behind the priestess, silently watching the simple but solemn funeral. The nature of a warrior determined that they would always be on the front lines. They were the group of people who were most likely to die in battle. Therefore, no matter how strong they were, one should always respect those who were loyal to their mission and used their bodies to protect their comrades. Soren bowed slightly to pay his respects. This was a valiant warrior. His tattered armor represented the glory of a warrior. P.S. 2 updates will be released at the same time. It'll be more enjoyable if you read it at the same time. However, the click-through rate of the book isn't high. If you want to read it later, I won't release it. Chapter 24. Soren waited quietly. When the funeral was over, he walked up to Vivian and nodded to the priestess. "Thank you for your help these past 2 days. I'm going to take her with me." Vivian's face lit up when she saw Soren. She held one of Soren's fingers and said happily, "Big brother. You're back." The priestess had a sad expression on her face, as if she was still grieving for the dead. She glanced at Soren and frowned. Priestesses usually had strong senses. Before this, Soren was like a gangster on the streets. Although he was good at fighting, he had never experienced a real battle. But now, Soren was like a warrior to her. He had the same aura as the temple guards. It was a murderous aura. Most of the temple guards here were retired from the battlefield, or they had experienced many battles. How could Soren change so much in such a short time? Did he experience something in the past 2 days? Soren bowed his head slightly to Pastor Phil and was about to leave with Vivian. "Wait." The priestess stopped him and quickly said, "Vivian has some talents that normal people don't have. Maybe she has the potential to become a priestess. I think you should leave her here first. If she can become a priestess, it'll be good for her future. At least it's better than." At this point, the priestess stopped talking. What she meant was, of course, that it was better than following Sauron around the streets. Becoming a priestess of a god was equivalent to having a noble identity, and her status would also skyrocket. In her opinion, it was better than following Sauron around in a third-rate gang in the slums. Of course, she didn't know about Soren's massacre in the slums. Vivian wouldn't tell anyone about it. In the priestess' eyes, Soren was still a cheat in a certain guild. No matter how good a thief's skills were, in the end, they were still useless. Humph. Surprisingly, Soren wasn't the first to speak up. Vivian's expression was ugly. She glared at the priestess and said, "I don't want to be a priestess. Staying by my brother's side is the best." She would never allow anyone to look down on her brother. What's wrong with being a thief? If Soren hadn't risked his life to steal her things, she wouldn't have survived until now. These lofty and despicable people. Who knew how difficult it was for a teenager to raise a 3-year-old girl? Her brother used to carry bags at the docks for a period of time, but no matter how hard he worked, the money he earned was still not enough to fill their stomachs. In Vivian's heart, her brother was the one who held up her world. She would never allow anyone to look down on her brother or speak ill of him, even if it was her sister, the priest, who she had always been close to. The little girl glared at her fiercely, as if the other party was her enemy. The priestess was stunned. She had never seen the little girl lose her temper, especially with her. She wanted to apologize, but she still stubbornly believed that Soren couldn't give her a better future. He was a thief from the slums. In the future, he would at most become the leader of a gang, but his life would still be precarious. Vivian deserved a better future. The priestess insisted that she was doing this for Vivian's sake, so her expression was stubborn. She turned her head and stared at Soren, as if she wanted him to realize that Vivian would only have a better future if she stayed in the church. Unfortunately, she was disappointed. Soren only smiled and gently stroked Vivian's head, as if he was comforting an angry kitten. He smiled and lifted Vivian's small body, then placed her on his shoulder. The little girl giggled and wrapped her arms around Soren's neck, rubbing her forehead against his hair. She was always so happy. If no one purposely made her angry, this quiet little girl could happily busy herself for a day. She cleaned the house, washed the clothes, packed the things. Although the clothes were always dirty, Soren didn't mind. "I'm sorry." Soren held the little girl's waist with one hand. She was a little malnourished, so she was light as a feather. He slowly shook his head and said seriously, "Vivian won't become a priestess." A priestess? The time of troubles was about to begin. The Dawn Lord was one of the first gods to fall. When that time came, the priestess in front of him would lose her ability to cast divine spells. Unless her wisdom exceeded 20, she would be able to reanalyze divine spells with her own ability. Then she would be able to give her faith to the origin of order, and use her faith as the core to understand the world. Otherwise, she would be an ordinary person in the future. At most, she would have a few more combat skills than ordinary people. Soren had already decided to leave. He wanted to leave the chaos caused by the skinning incident. How could he allow Vivian to stay in the Dawn Lord shrine and become a priestess for a god that was about to fall? "Let's go." Soren bowed slightly again to express his gratitude for her care, then left with the little girl on his shoulder. No matter what, the other party had good intentions. However, for Soren, leaving with Vivian and finding a safe place to steadily improve his strength was the best choice. The priestess watched the two leave. She opened her mouth to say something, but in the end, she couldn't say anything. She only looked a little disappointed and envious. They depended on each other. That was the thought that popped up in her mind. Perhaps for Vivian, there was nothing happier than staying by Soren's side. The priestess looked at the little girl's happy face as she left, then looked at the empty shrine behind her and muttered, "I hope you can take good care of her." She sighed softly and walked toward the main hall. The evil skinning people were getting more and more brazen, and the 3 shrines of Amber City had decided to join forces to deal with them. There was going to be a huge battle soon. Perhaps it would be better for her to stay by Soren's side since she was going to join the battle. Leaving Amber City was not as simple as closing one's eyes. Not to mention the possibility of losing one's way, accidents along the way could cost one's life. For a person to wander alone in the wilderness, he was either courageous because of his skills, or courting death. There was no second possibility. Soren still had a lot of things to prepare. For example, he needed to find a merchant group and pay them a sum of money to follow them. For example, he needed to recall his old fighting skills and try to practice his basic sword skills. After that, he needed to master sword form, heavy hack. He needed to prepare emergency medicine, enough food, camping equipment, and even a mount for Vivian. Monsters weren't the only dangerous things in the wilderness. There were also poisonous insects, beasts, and bandits. If he didn't know how big of a mess the skinning incident had caused, he wouldn't have left. He really didn't want to take Vivian on a long journey. However, he had to leave now because according to his estimation, the skinning incident would escalate to another level in half a month. The first child of God would appear in front of the world. It was the Witch of Fear, Lillian. The Dread Lord of the Abyss, who possessed great divine power, foresaw his fall, so he left his descendants in the mortal world and distributed his divine power to them. There were demons in the abyss who did the same. They left their most primordial divinity as a seed in one of their descendants. After that, they planned to use the divinity to devour the soul of their descendant and finally use the divine power inherited by their descendant to be resurrected. Some succeeded, and some failed. Some demons' resurrection plans were ruined and eventually died in the mortal world. However, some demons' resurrection plans were successful. They were resurrected in the broken bodies of their descendants and restored their divine power. It was not a possession. Instead, they directly destroyed their descendants and used their divine power to create a new body for resurrection. It was cruel. However, this was the law of the abyss. If Soren remembered correctly, there were at least 2 children of God at that time. These were the descendants of the demons with great power. They were the ones who caused the initial turmoil. The descendants of the Dreadlord killed each other and spread fear in the mortal world. The skinning incident was an opportunity, an ancient and evil sacrificial ritual. In the end, the Witch of Fear, Lillian, became one of the most powerful children of God. Then, when the time of troubles began, she was killed by the Lady of Silver Moon, goddess of the moon, who had lost her divine power and descended to the mortal world as a saint. This was not the end. It was just the beginning of a more chaotic era because the gods would descend to the mortal world as saints. Chapter 25. Under the dim candlelight. Soren and Vivian sat opposite each other at a small table. In front of them were white bread, bacon, fish soup, and lettuce. In this era, human food was still relatively simple and barren. In fact, with the historical background of Westerners, the food itself was very uncreative. The real culinary skills were in the Elven Kingdom and the small halflings, especially the latter who were almost master level in cooking. But for Vivian, the food in front of her was a little too sumptuous. Brother. The little girl swallowed her saliva and blinked. Isn't it too wasteful? There was meat, soup, and white bread. In the past, they could only eat such good food during the new year. Soren didn't answer. He just reached out and touched her little head lovingly. Then, with a twist of his fingertips, a shiny kindler appeared on the back of his hand. Under the dim candlelight, the gold dirils shone brightly, causing Vivian's beautiful little face to show a trace of surprise. Then, she smiled until her eyes narrowed like crescent moons, and whispered, "Big brother. Are we rich?" She didn't care where the money came from. Since it was in their hands, the money belonged to them. Sauron was amused by the way the little girl spoke in a low voice. He reached out and pinched Vivian's cheeks. Then, he took out an embroidered pouch and shook it gently with his fingers. There was a crisp sound coming from the pouch. He smiled and said, "This is for you. Vivian's share of the profits." The little girl didn't understand what Soren meant, but it didn't prevent her from knowing that it was for her. She reached out her small hand and took the pouch. It was sewn with a simple patterned cloth. Only the noble ladies in the city would use such a pouch. There was a circle of string on it that could be tied up by pulling it tight. Vivian opened the pouch and was immediately dazzled by the light inside. She saw several kindler and many silver dirils. "We're rich." The little girl smiled until her eyes narrowed. She happily put away the pouch and said with a sweet smile, "Thank you, big brother. This is kindler." She had never had so much money before. It was enough for her to buy a lot of food and a new dress. "Let's eat." Soren rubbed her head and placed a piece of meat into her bowl. In the beginning, he was not used to the lack of chopsticks, but as he stayed in this world for a long time, he gradually became indifferent to it. Adventurers were not so particular when they were in the wild. Most of the time, they would just eat with their hands. The little girl happily took a bite, and her face showed a trace of satisfaction. Then, she scooped up some fish soup with a spoon, blew on it, and handed it to Soren. She blinked and said, "Big brother. Open your mouth." Soren smiled helplessly and opened his mouth. Vivian giggled and suddenly drank the soup herself. She even pretended to smack her lips and said, "It's delicious." Naughty girl. Soren did not know whether to laugh or cry, but he was inexplicably happy in his heart. He had not been this happy in a long time. It was a quiet day. The turbulent situation in Amber City did not affect the two's good mood. Soren woke up early in the morning to practice his swordsmanship. Basic swordsmanship could be perfectly applied to any weapon because its core was to hack, slash, and stab. The memory of the battle was still there, and Soren remembered it very clearly. He practiced according to the routine in his memory, familiarizing himself with the weapon in his hand and familiarizing himself with his own body. Sword form, heavy hack. This was a very practical combat skill. The key to it was to concentrate all the strength of the whole body into a single hack. For example, if you threw a punch. If you only used the strength of your arm, it would be obvious that you did not pass the test. The strength you used would not even be 1/3 of your full strength, and it would not be fatal if you hit your opponent. However, if you could use the strength of your waist, then congratulations, you have mastered the most basic combat skills. The strength of your punch would be enough to severely injure your opponent. However, if you could use all the strength in your body to explode with a single punch, then you would be considered to have mastered a combat skill that could be fatal. Sword form, heavy hack, was such a combat skill. You have to concentrate all your strength in a single slash in order to achieve the maximum speed and lethality that you can unleash in a single slash. Only then would you be considered to have mastered the skill. Sword form, heavy hack, was a combat skill that could be applied to all weapons. When used, it could maximize the user's strength. Even an ordinary person with 10 points of strength could split a 20 centimeter thick piece of wood with a single hack after mastering the skill. This was because concentrating all the strength in your body into a single line would increase your combat power by several times. According to the statistics. That is, when using this type of combat skill, you can unleash the maximum amount of damage you can deal. It was a bit similar to the aura slash that a warrior could master after advancing to the next level. However, sword form, heavy hack, was a one-time attack, while the aura slash could be used to stimulate the blood of the human body through a special method for around 30 seconds. If you could advance to a sword saint, you would be able to unleash twice the lethality at the cost of overloading your body and getting injured. This was what many people were afraid of in the past. A fatal attack that did not need to hit the vitals. However, the advancement of a sword saint had a special requirement. The way they unleashed their power meant that they could not wear any kind of armor. Otherwise, the burden on their body would cause their speed and lethality to greatly decrease. For example, Soren never wore anything above leather armor because it would cause his agility to decrease and his ability to dodge. It could be said that rogues relied on their agility to dodge. If you wanted to wear armor, you had to wear heavy armor. You had to give up your agility in order to pursue a strong defense. Time passed little by little. Soren trained for half a day and then began to read a book. That's right. Those books that he found in the treasure cave. Although he could recognize the words in them, he had to memorize them again. Perhaps it was because of his eidetic memory ability, Soren memorized them very quickly. While he was trying to memorize one of the books about basic spell knowledge and information related to the Magus region, he suddenly remembered something. A row of data appeared, reading completed. You have successfully read and memorized a book. Literacy +1, spell identification +1. There were no basic professions for scholars. Soren could only improve his literacy by reading books. Because these books recorded the knowledge of wizards, Soren also improved his spell identification skill. In simple terms, it was the familiarity of various spells. For example, when an enemy used a spell, you could judge it based on the opponent's voice and hand gestures. Then, you could prepare to dodge and advance. Or some special magical devices, as well as various enchanted extraordinary items and so on, you can recognize them through the knowledge of spell identification. In a battle, no one would yell out what skill they were going to use. Whether or not you could predict the enemy's spell attack depended entirely on your skill points in spell identification. This skill was not useful against warriors. But if you were to fight against wizards, it was a life-saving skill that must be mastered. Soren relied on this skill several times to predict the spells cast by wizards in advance and then avoided the range of the spells. For example, if you knew that the opponent was going to cast a fireball spell and rolled to dodge in advance, you would only take half of the damage. But if you didn't know, if you were in the explosion range of the fireball spell, you would be instantly turned into a Spartan, SBD. If your spell identification skill was high enough, you could even judge the enemy's silent and instant spells by the fluctuation of arcane energy around you. If you wanted to avoid instant spells, spell identification was a skill that must be mastered. At noon, Soren brought Vivian into Amber City. He wanted to go to the business district to buy some daily necessities, including camping tools and small things that might be useful. Of course. The cute little girl also needed a new set of clothes. Because they were going to travel in the wilderness, those beautiful but impractical clothes had to be abandoned. Soren's first priority was to buy clothes that were sturdy, durable, and had a certain degree of protection. The lowest requirement was that they would not be damaged by the barbs on the trees and flowers in the wilderness. Therefore, skirts had to be abandoned, and he could only buy some sturdy clothes. Then there were shoes. This was one of the most important things for an adventure in the wilderness. First, it had to be durable. Second, and most importantly, it had to be warm. Soren did not hesitate to spend 3 kindlers to buy a pair of high-quality moccasins. So much so that Vivian even complained a little. After the little girl received the new pair of boots, although she said that it was too wasteful and expensive, and that she should just buy a pair of ordinary thick cloth shoes, her eyes were already narrowed into 2 lines. She was full of smiles for the whole day. They were really exquisite and beautiful boots. Probably only the noble ladies in the city could afford to wear them. They were just a little too big, even if they were the smallest size. But it's okay. I'll grow up soon, and by then, it'll be just right. Now, I can buy some things first. The little girl thought about trivial things in her mind, and the corners of her mouth unconsciously curled into a smile. Her beautiful big eyes also narrowed into a smile. I have new clothes and boots. Okay. And a new hairband, pink. It's very pretty. I'm so happy today. And so, Vivian's happy day passed just like that. She did not care much about leaving Amber City because the little girl's concept of home was very vague. Moreover, in her heart, only the place where her brother was counted as her home. Therefore, her home was very simple. Wherever her home went, she would go. Chapter 26. In the evening, Soren brought Vivian back to the shack in the slums. He bought a lot of things. After all, the journey could take up to a month. They had to travel from Amber City to White Run City, then take a detour from White Run City to Autumn Leaf City to avoid the Knolls territory. Autumn Leaf City was where the half-elves lived, but it was still 5 days away from the Forest of Dreams. Traveling in this era was very troublesome. It took Soren half a day to find a caravan heading to White Run, and he paid 5 kindler coins to go with them. The Agate River ran from the north to the south, and Amber City was developed because of it. However, transportation by land and water was only one of the channels. There were more goods that needed to be transported by caravans. It was normal to look for a caravan when traveling in the wilderness because most caravans had their own hired guards. They might be hired by a merchant, or several merchants pooled their money to hire them. If other people wanted to travel with them, they would have to pay a certain price based on the distance of the journey. In return, the caravan would protect and provide help along the way. Most of the caravan guards were warriors with clean backgrounds. Some of them even formed groups under the Adventurers Guild. It was a bit like an escort agency, a business that relied heavily on reputation. After all, traveling in the wilderness was too risky, and one's life depended on it. Any accident could lead to failure. Therefore, not just any adventurer could become a caravan guard. Trust. This was very, very important. Under the dim candlelight, Vivian was tidying up her small pouch. There were a lot of miscellaneous items in it, including needles and threads. If one did not have a full set of rare-grade equipment, they would come in handy one day. Soren was also tidying up his things. The 3-foot-long multidimensional pouch was not small at all. It had almost a cubic meter of space, but it was not big enough to hold all the items. Just a few sets of clothes, some dry food, and camping equipment were enough to fill up half of the pouch's space. Soren did not even dare to dream of having a 10-foot-long multidimensional pouch. Although the pouch's space was only 3 times larger, its price had increased by more than 30 times. A 10-foot-long multidimensional bag was used as a small storage unit. The little girl carefully organized her things. Her beautiful and exquisite moccasins were placed by the bedside. Every time she looked at them, she couldn't help but reveal a happy smile. Although Soren told her to wear it now, Vivian insisted on wearing it on the day of departure. The road conditions in the slums were too harsh. If he wasn't careful, he might step on feces and mud. Even the wilderness outside was better than here. The little girl didn't have many things. Soon, she was done. She tilted her head and looked at Soren with a sweet smile on her face. Looking at the multidimensional bag, she still felt a sense of novelty. There were so many things in this world that she didn't know about. Brother said that he would bring her to the elven kingdom. Were the elves there really as beautiful as the legend said? I really want to see them sooner. The young girl did not realize the tiredness and danger of the journey at all. She was only satisfying her curiosity and imagination. After all, she was only 8 years old. Soren fastened a leggings and a belt buckle on his waist. He tested to see if they fit. Then, he took out a sharp throwing knife and carefully inserted them into the leggings. There was a small pouch on top of each dagger. It was natural to be well prepared when adventuring in the wilderness. Since he had a scimitar, he couldn't carry a bow or crossbow with him. Therefore, it was necessary to carry a few throwing knives with him. The damage of a 1d3 could also be life-saving. Rogues were good at crafting weapons. Soren modified the crossbow's firing mechanism. He removed the shell and the continuous firing mechanism and turned it into a single-shot sleeve crossbow. This way, it was small enough to be carried in clothes. Although its damage would be greatly reduced, it was good for stealth and could be used for sneak attacks. Open and aboveboard? Rogues were definitely not fated to use such things. Swoosh! Soren grabbed the throwing knife and threw it out. It hit the door frame in an instant. He calculated his accuracy and strength and said to himself, with my current strength, I can only shoot at 10 meters at most. It's barely enough for a battle in the wilderness. The two of them actually had a lot of things to bring. In addition to the multidimensional bag that was full, Soren also prepared a package. The caravan would leave the day after tomorrow, so he had to take Vivian to buy a mount tomorrow. A warhorse was definitely out of the question. Even if he bought one, he wouldn't be able to afford it. He could prepare a workhorse, which cost about 10 Kindler coins. Many people naively thought that horses ate grass, but in fact, most horses ate grain. Even the inferior workhorses needed to be fed with beans and wheat bran mixed with grass regularly. Otherwise, they wouldn't have enough strength. If it was a superior warhorse, it would eat beans and wheat as its staple food. It would also be mixed with eggs and other food regularly. Wild horses eat most of the time. Stupa. Otherwise, how could it bear the charge of a heavy knight? If it was a special mount, it would need to be fed with meat, which would cost more than 10 silver dirhams a day. Let's sleep. Soren pulled out the throwing knife, then took off his equipment and said softly, we'll buy something tomorrow. We're leaving the day after tomorrow. It might be a tough journey. You need to rest now. Vivian nodded obediently. Then, her petite body shrank inwards as she whispered, Big brother. There's something I haven't told you yet. Soren smiled and rubbed her little head. He lay flat on the bed to organize his thoughts and asked casually, what is it? It's this. The little girl got up, and her cute little face was quite serious. She said seriously, look. Yue, she uttered a strange syllable, and then a bright light suddenly burst out from her fingertips. In an instant, Soren was in trouble. 1 second ago, Soren heard the little girl's words and turned his head. Then, a bright light suddenly burst out and blinded his eyes. It could be said that everything in front of him was completely white. It was as if he had been hit by a flash bomb. Flash? Soren closed his eyes and rubbed his forehead. After a while, he recovered and said with a face full of disbelief, how did you suddenly know how to cast spells? No. This should be light. Flash was an enhanced version of light. When casting a spell, there was an extra syllable. Soren still had his memories of the past, so he knew a lot about low-level cantrips. Very quickly, he overturned his previous judgment. But this was not important. The important thing was, how did Vivian suddenly know how to cast spells? Even if it was the lowest level of cantrips, it would take a long time to memorize and understand them. She had only been separated from him for 2 days. How could she master spells in such a short time? The little girl's expression was also very blank. After hearing his question, she replied, "I'm not too sure either. That day, I saw Sister Annalyn use it once, so I was curious and tried it out. I didn't expect to succeed so quickly." Divine spell? Extraordinary perception? Soren's face showed a hint of shock. Then, his expression became more serious than ever. He said seriously, "You really only saw it once?" "Yes." Vivian nodded slightly and asked doubtfully, "Is this spell very difficult to learn?" It was more than difficult. If one did not have enough talent, many people would not be able to learn spells in their lifetime. Could it be that Vivian had 20 points of perception? Otherwise, how could she learn a level 0 divine spell in such a short time? After all, she had never been baptized, nor did she believe in any god. "Sit down." Soren sat up with a serious expression. Then, he asked Vivian to sit up straight as well. He stretched out his hand and waved it in front of the little girl's eyes. Then, with a flip of his hand, a kindler appeared between his fingers and disappeared with a flick of his finger. Soren's fingers moved rapidly. A kindler would appear and disappear at the same time. Sometimes it would be 1, sometimes it would be 2. In the end, he clenched his fist and placed it in front of Vivian's eyes. He said in a deep voice, "How many kindler do I have?" 20 points of extraordinary agility. Soren's reflexes were far beyond the range of a normal person's. The speed and agility of his fingers were also beyond the limits of what the naked eye could capture. You could guess what he was doing, but it was very difficult to see clearly. Normal people could move their fingers back and forth and create afterimages. If they bent their fingers in the process, it would be very difficult for the naked eye to catch them. Not to mention, Soren was a top rogue with 20 points of extraordinary agility. Vivian showed a troubled expression and bitterly said, "Big brother, I didn't see clearly. Why don't you give me a hint?" Soren's expression froze. He glared at her and said in a serious tone, "Just guess. Just use your intuition." The little girl nodded as if she understood. She tilted her head and thought for a moment before saying, "I see. Then I guess there are 2. Soren frowned and slowly opened his hand. There were 3 kindler in it. "Ah." Vivian was disappointed, "You guessed wrong. It wasn't intuition. If one was born with 20 points of intuition, they would automatically acquire a talent called sixth sense. This was a very powerful ability. It could even be said to be one of the top talents. Let alone guessing the number of coins, even if an enemy wanted to launch a sneak attack, they would be able to use their intuition to figure it out. Then, if it wasn't intuition, then there was only one answer. P.S. I suddenly feel like I'm watching Conan. Chapter 27. Extraordinary Charm. Soren stared at the little girl in front of him and said in disbelief, "Is Vivian a natural warlock?" Warlocks. Tall, rich, and handsome mages. They didn't need to learn any knowledge, and with time, they would automatically master the relevant spells. They didn't need any spell slots, and they didn't need to rely on the weave to cast spells, because their ability to cast spells was their innate talent. It was as simple as eating and drinking. As long as they had the potential to become a warlock, they would automatically learn all kinds of spells when the time came. They didn't need to understand the structure of the spells, and they could cast all kinds of spells by instinct. Wizards, priests, warlocks. These were the 3 representative professions of mages. The attribute that governed a wizard's casting ability was intelligence, the attribute that affected a priest's casting ability was perception, and the attribute that determined a warlock's ability to comprehend spells was charm. These 3 attributes were actually very difficult to describe in a few words. So, let me think about it first. and then I'll explain it to you in a simpler way. First was intelligence. It represented memory and comprehension. Casting spells required the memorization of complex models. This model was a bit like the modern circuit board. There were many semiconductors, spell nodes, and circuit structures, spell circuits, on it, so if you want to cast spells successfully, you need a strong memory and comprehension ability like a calculator. To use a modern analogy, the wizards had to train their brains to become the lowest level biological computer, which could calculate a large number of spell models in an instant. This required the development of the right side of the brain. So most wizards had a good memory, and their comprehension ability was also very strong, not EQ. They were like the top students among the top students, who could deduce the structure of an atomic bomb in their brain. In fact, these kinds of people weren't necessarily good at dealing with people and other aspects. This was the intelligence that determined a wizard's strength. Next was perception. This was easy to understand. It represented a person's willpower, judgment, perception, and intuition. Generally, people with strong perception had a hidden sixth sense, which could predict things in the dark. They also had a strong perception of their surroundings, and could perceive many subtle changes, and could even perceive some hidden existences and powers. So Soren tested Vivian's sixth sense. Finally, there was charm. This was the most difficult thing to explain. It could be understood as three parts: appearance, charisma, and affinity. They needed to stop here. Because he couldn't explain it clearly in a few words, he needed to organize his sentences. First of all, appearance. Most people with extraordinary appearances had decent charm, 12 points and above. This was because most intelligent creatures pursued beauty, which meant that the appearance association was still very powerful. The second was personality charm, which was a person's inner charm. For example, many people who did not look handsome or beautiful often had a very strong personality charm. Among them, the most representative was a person with a high level of personality charm, 18 points and above. The following paragraph describes the real-life effects of charisma. On the 26th of February 1815, Napoleon returned to France from Elba, and the restored House of Bourbon sent its troops. Napoleon went up to meet them alone, waved his hand, and said, "I am back." Then the soldiers shouted, "Welcome, His Majesty the Emperor." And so they changed sides. Lastly, there was affinity. This was the most important branch of the charisma attribute. Usually, people with high charisma had strong affinity. If there was no subjective rejection, they could easily make others feel good about them. This kind of affinity was divided into many aspects, and the target it was inclined to was different according to one's own characteristics. For example, the affinity to people, bards, the affinity to animals, druids, and the most important affinity to elemental energy, warlocks. Even affinity to the laws of the universe, fate warlocks, divine warlocks. So, mages could be described with these three metaphors, which were generally regarded as the elemental energy of the evocation system. First of all, wizards relied on their intelligence to search for elemental energy and analyze it through complex calculations. They understood the nature of elemental energy, when it was active, when it was inert, what changes would occur when different elemental energies collided, what changes would occur when the same elemental energies were combined, what kind of magic circuits needed to control them, and how many magic nodes, conductors, needed to be set up to make them explode. This was the core point of wizards relying on their intelligence to cast spells. Next, priests, droll, relied on their perception to find elemental energy, and then used the power of faith, spiritual energy, to influence them. Finally, with the power of the gods, nature, and laws, they controlled them to complete the casting of spells. So priests gave their faith to the gods, droll gave their faith to nature, and some special professions gave their faith to the laws of the world. Elemental energy was only a part of the structure of priest spells. The core energy of priest spells was still divine power, so it was called divine spells. Finally, there were warlocks. This was very simple. Because they didn't have to do anything, they just had to wait for elemental energy to gather on their own, and then awaken the ability to cast spells. If wizards caught elemental energy to control it, then priests found elemental energy to influence it. As for warlocks, they waited for elemental energy to take the initiative to approach them. That was why there was a saying, warlocks were the tall, rich, and handsome mages. However, it was obvious that they couldn't reach the highest level by relying on talent alone. Therefore, the number of spells mastered by warlocks was far less than that of wizards. At the same time, the speed of learning new spells was also very slow because most warlocks didn't have high intelligence. Their memory and comprehension ability were average. Wizards needed 3 to 5 months to master low-level spells, while warlocks might even need 30 to 50 years to master one. A typical example would be the kobold warlocks. These creatures naturally had more than 16 points of charm, but their intelligence was only around 10 points. Basically, whatever spells they learned when leveling up as a warlock, they would only be able to cast the same spells in their lifetime. Only warlocks with intelligence of more than 18 points and the potential to become wizards could expand their number of spells through learning. If the goddess of magic had fallen, then the requirement would be increased to more than 20 points of intelligence. Not enough intelligence. It was better to just rely on talent to cast spells. Because no matter how much you learned, you wouldn't be able to remember those complicated spell circuits and spell nodes, and you would never be able to construct new spell models subjectively. The higher the level of the spell, the more this was the case. Was she really a warlock? The more Soren thought about it, the more he felt that it was possible. The little girl seemed to have a natural affinity with people, and she was also very cute. Her charm was definitely not lower than 16 points. If Vivian was really a natural warlock, then she didn't need to understand spells at all. She just needed to follow her instincts and use her talent to cast spells. That was why there were cases of people learning Illuminate just by looking at a priest casting a spell. Because all level 0 spells were universal. Soren closed his eyes and thought for a moment, then he said seriously, Vivian. Repeat after me. UA. Is. GF, relying on his strong memory, Soren said some strange half-syllables. If it was a normal person, it would be very difficult to say these half-syllables, but he succeeded. Of course. But nothing happened. But when Vivian followed Soren to say these strange half-syllables, a weak electric arc suddenly appeared in her palm. Soren's body suddenly stiffened, and then his hair stood on end. Lightning shock, level 0 spell. Soren's hair stood on end. He quickly stopped Vivian in front of him and said in a deep voice, let go of your feelings. Try to use your mind to control the energy you feel. You don't need to understand it. You just need to learn how to make it listen to you. Crackle. Vivian nodded as if she understood. She tried again very seriously, and then a weak electric arc appeared in her palm again. It jumped a few times before gradually disappearing. It worked. Soren's face showed a hint of joy. He happily hugged the little girl and kissed her. Vivian is really a warlock. In the future, she will definitely be a rich and beautiful mage. The little girl didn't understand Soren at all, but this didn't prevent her from showing a happy smile. Because she finally had the ability to help her brother. Warlocks. With the awakening of their innate ability, they only needed a key to cast level 0 spells, and this key was the spell of the spell. In the future, as their profession level increased, they would automatically comprehend and master higher level spells. Depending on the aspect of affinity, warlocks would automatically comprehend the relevant spells and automatically master the spell of the spell. There was no need to analyze the structure of those spells. Because their ability to cast spells was itself a kind of talent. Finally, the brain of living creatures had hereditary memory and hereditary talent. This ability was once considered by many players as the source of the warlock's power. While having extraordinary affinity, the energy of nature would also awaken the hereditary memory they had, and automatically awaken the relevant spell memory when their ability improved. So, many people thought that warlocks were the descendants of some powerful beings in the mythological era. Among them, the representative was the dragon disciple. P.S. This chapter is a bit boring, but it's a very important thing. You're tuning into the Dreamy Love Stories YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.